with a four-way tire iron, and one of the deputies was struck with the tire iron. That deputy did discharge his firearm to defend himself, and the suspect was later pronounced dead at the hospital. The deputies were both placed on administrative leave per departmental policy. The DCI was contacted and brought in to conduct an investigation, and the deputies have been interviewed. In fact, the second one's probably being interviewed as we speak, but the other deputy has already been interviewed. At some point in the next week or so, I would suspect that the DCI will have completed their report. We'll forward that information to the county attorney's office for his review of whether or not the use of force was justified. The only thing I would say is that the body cam video that was captured, I've witnessed. It would look by all accounts that the use of force was justified, and that there was nothing that the deputies could have done other than what they did. One deputy did attempt to discharge his taser. It was unsuccessful in having any effect. So that's just to bring you up to speed. The deputies will continue to be on administrative leave until they're cleared to go back to duty, which hopefully would be another week or so, and then we'll put them back on duty. So that's kind of the latest information. So I don't know if you have any questions or how much I could really answer, but.
Appreciate the update.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have Taylor's motion. I'll second the agenda. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes 4-0. Moving on to item 3, which is the consent agenda. Consent agenda items 3 through 9 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 3 is approval of the minutes of the January 11th, 2022 meeting. Item 4, approval of claims. Item 4 from Board of Supervisors, it's the liaison assignments for 2022. Item 6 from the Treasurer, Tina Bertrand, approval to lift tax suspension for initials FS. Item 7 from Human Resources, approval of memorandum of personnel transactions. Item 8 from Board Administration, A, approval of notice property sale resolution for 1601 Myrtle Street for Tuesday, February 1st at 3:35 p.m. Item B is approval of notice of property sale resolution parcel known as 3rd and Main Street in Cushing for Tuesday, February 1st at 3:37 p.m. Number 9 from ITWCICC John Malloy, approve motion to designate Dean Stevens as the citizen representative of the Woodbury County Information and Communications Commissions for a 3-year term expiring December 31st, 2024. Any discussion on anything on the consent agenda?
I'd move it.
I'll second. So we have a motion and second on the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? And passes 4-0. Karen? I'm not the auditor. I screwed one up. Oop. All right, enter. Moving on to item 10 from Emergency Services, approve a new part-time paramedic position of 335 hours within the EMS department.
How are you?
All right.
So we have a part-time position now, or it's a little more than part-time, and we just want to cut that position in half to add another employee, just with everything that's going on, and we just want to make sure that we have enough staff to cover this if needed. And so I think Welty's position, I can't remember the original number, but we're just going to divide that into 2 and have 2 part-time paramedic positions instead of 1.
So is this in reaction to what we're planning to do with the EMS position?
Yes, sir. That and paramedic Welty, he's already retired once, and he wants to slow down just a little bit. So that too, and if the medical examiner thing goes by, he said he'd like to take that on a little stronger.
Okay.
Because it's not as much patient care as it would be on the back of the ambulance.
So this position would be one shift a week, or?
It probably once a month, I mean, by the way the numbers are. Just, for example, we had a medic out, and paramedic Welty worked the 24-hour shift for that medic this week, yesterday actually. So it'd be split between those two. Paramedic Welty still teaches a lot too, so it would give him some free time and have more options for our office if he's not available to come in and cover that shift.
What do we have right now for paramedics? Is it 2 and 3?
So we have three.
Quarters?
Well, I'm sorry.
What's the total number of FTEs for paramedics right now? Is it
The hours, or I'm sorry, I didn't.
the positions?
Oh.
We have,
So we have 3 paramedics that are
Okay.
full-time, and then we have that part-time paramedic. But it's not, I'm sorry, it's not really part-time. He works a little more than part-time, but he doesn't get the benefits. It's like, I'm not familiar with the term that y'all use for it, but, so we would be dividing his hours in half to 380. I think they both get 380 instead of the full.
but there's no financial impact?
No, sir.
Okay. So basically, you're making the one part-timer sort of like 2 half-time part-timers?
Yes.
Are we understanding this
Yes, sir.
correctly? Okay.
I see no issue with it if that's,
I would move to approve the new part-time paramedic position with no financial impact to the county.
Second.
I got a motion by Taylor, second by Young. Any other discussion from any?
Would this be limited to 335 hours, or how do you plan to?
So that's the plan, is to limit that. Right now, like I said, we had a sick paramedic, and he was not able to work last week on his shift, and paramedic Welty ended up having to go teach somewhere. He was at a conference, so we didn't have anybody to cover that shift. We just backfilled from the prior shift, and I try not to backfill as much because then they're working a 48 rather than a 24. So it's just so we can have an extra option if something comes up.
Mr. Chair, so just for your awareness, I did speak with HR in regards to the personnel action forms, and we do need a personnel action form to come through reducing that other position by half the hourly amount in
Okay.
order for it not to have a financial impact
Okay.
moving forward on the budget.
So is that something that you'd suggest we put on the next agenda, or that we defer this item to then?
Yeah,
So
I
you got
spoke
that?
with Melissa, and she plans on putting it on next week.
Okay.
Sounds great. Well, we have a motion and a second. We're on item 10. Okay, cool. So
Good.
seeing how it's revenue neutral, I think it seems like a good idea if that's going to cover your shifts better. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 11. Thank you, Andrew. Community and Economic Development, we got 11A is approval of construction evaluation resolution relating to construction permits for large animal confinement operations.
Good evening, Supervisors. David Gleiser, Director of Community Economic Development. It's a fairly routine annual housekeeping item. We pass this every year. Every year, the state requires counties to submit a formal resolution to their office, which would then allow counties the ability to use their master matrix to evaluate applications for construction permits for large animal confinement operations, those that are 1,000 animal units or more. If we do so, it lets us submit our formal recommendations to the DNR concerning a particular construction permit application. It does allow us to send our county employees with the DNR on site to do site inspections at proposed facilities, and as well as it allows us to appeal the DNR's decision regarding the construction permit application to the Environmental Protection Commission. The DNR stated that on average, 88 counties pass these annually.
And we've done it every year. I'll move it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Raddick, second by Ung. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Excuse me, Chairman, I think you have someone from the public that wanted to.
On this item?
Yes, sir.
Okay, come on up, sir.
I'm Kim Alexander. I farm near Siouxland. I appreciate David's remarks, and my understanding is you all do pass this every year, and I think that's great. Do any of you live within wind of one of these factories, these hog factories? Well, I do. I live about 3/4 of a mile as the wind blows from one of these things has 5 of these hog houses. And when the wind is from the east, it stinks. And when they spread that manure across the road, it stinks for a week. So I appreciate y'all regulating these things. I hope someday you'll regulate them out of existence. But until that day, I would just challenge y'all to work at a positive on this thing. Make Woodbury County friendly for small farms, small businesses. I see one of the items on the agenda is selling that farm out by the old county home. I think that's great. How about looking into taking some of the thousands of other acres that Woodbury County owns and start selling that off in 10, 20 acre parcels to small families so they can get started with their own small farms. You've got these beautiful Luss Hills that I farm in. Families farm there all our lives. They are perfect for small scale farming. And I just want to encourage y'all to do that. I know a number of years ago you had the organic farming tax credit. If you applied and received organic certification for your farm, you could get a tax break on your property taxes. I was one of the few that filled out, applied for that thing, and frankly, the headaches, the hoops you had to jump through, the financial savings was almost as much as what it costs to get certified. I appreciate the thought, I appreciate the program, but it just did not work. So again, I want to encourage y'all to take a step to the positive instead of just checking off the boxes. And again, I appreciate what David said, and it's necessary and it's needed, but take it beyond that and make Woodbury County a place that's small, that young families, beginning farmer families want to get started, and you've got the land to do it with. I want to encourage you to really look into that. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. That passes 5-0. Moving on to 11B, which is the resolution to set the date for public hearing to amend the urban renewal plan for the Grow Woodbury County urban renewal area for Tuesday, February 15th.
Essentially, it's a action item to follow up on the resolution that the board passed in November to pledge the county's support for the economic development expansion that's occurring here soon to speak. And so it's a $70 million expansion that was announced by AGP in November of 2021. On November 19th, the board passed a resolution expressing its intent to provide economic development support to this project, and this action just effectuates that commitment. It's required by the code in order to amend our urban renewal plan and for the authorization and execution of the development agreement.
I move to approve the resolution to set a date for the public hearing and amend the urban renewal plan for the Grow Woodbury County urban renewal area for Tuesday, February 15th at 4:35 p.m.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Ung. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
David. Moving on to item 12, Siouxland District Health, Kevin Green. 12A is acceptance of Rule 23-4 groundwater protection in Woodbury County as passed by Siouxland District Board of Health.
Yes, good afternoon, Board. Kevin Green, Director at Siouxland District Health Department. What's included in the packet is a groundwater protection Rule 23-4 that the Board of Health approved last week on their regular monthly meeting. They did conduct a public hearing. There was no one that came forward with any comments against this. In reality, what this does is this adds a fourth section of the Iowa Code as far as compliance in Woodbury County. The other part with this is this was what qualifies us as a designated entity to continue to provide these services. We have done it for since before 1999, and the reality of it is that this is Iowa code compliance is mandatory in the state. It's either Siouxland District Health Department will be providing this, or it'll become directly from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So this really has no change or impact in how we operate, what we do, but within this then it just actually adds the code section of chapter Iowa Code Administrative Code 38 to the 3 that were previously approved. When we discussed this, we decided that instead of having a 1999 record and then a 2022 record, we would merge it into one document and just pass and make sure that all 4 were accepted within Woodbury County. So I didn't entertain any questions related to this or comments.
So what were the changes that they made?
The change within the 2080 agreement, which is the next agenda item, is they required also the county to acknowledge Iowa Administrative Code Chapter 38. We already had on record in 1999 doing the 39, 49, and 69, but it added 38 to that requirement. So this puts us in compliance and with the ability then to sign the 28 agreement.
I'll go ahead and move 12A.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Taylor. Any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to 12B, which is approval of board chair to sign Iowa DNR agreement for private water well permitting and designating Siouxland District Health as the permitting entity.
Right, this is an updated agreement. We had a previous 2080 that they moved forward to modify, and that's where the extra code section was reflected within. Really within this 28 agreement, it is with Woodbury County and the Board of Supervisors, and in the agreement is just basically acknowledgement that we have endorsed the 4 sections of Iowa Code. In addition to that, with this, you're designated Siouxland District Health Department as the entity to provide basically the work related to this. And so we've had both documents. This was reviewed by Joshua in the county attorney's office, and so that's what's here. And so this is really just like I said, the 2080 agreement, and it designates us, and it continues work that we're already currently doing across the county.
You move it.
Second, motion by Taylor, second by Raddick. Any other discussion?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure thing. Just come up to the microphone though, Ken.
Sorry.
Apologize for my ignorance on this, but I see this private water well permitting.
Right.
What does that mean?
What it actually means is that any property owner that elects to construct a new well, there's a permitting process that's currently in place and required. So there's a permit that's required, and really what it's amounting to do is it is a tracking mechanism just to assure that the DNR is aware of where all private wells are newly constructed within the state, and then it's really up to the well company that goes ahead, and they're the ones that make sure that it is in compliance with that. That's a part of what they do.
Why does the DNR need to know where private wells are at?
The DNR tracks basically their need for knowing where private wells are at is they want to assure that if any of those wells are abandoned, they can be duly plugged, because if we get surface level water runoff that gets into the groundwater, that can contaminate a water supply for multiple wells. And so it's just been a process and a requirement that the DNR has had for years.
And so you're going to give a state agency the right to permit wells in
They already have claimed that right,
for new construction?
Right.
and instead of having the DNR come and do it, District Health locally will do it.
I would absolutely be against that. It's none of the state's business. It's none of the county's business where private wells are at on a farm or a private.
According to the Iowa Code, that's a responsibility of DNR to track and have those permitted.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 13A, approval of sale of county farm with possession date after the current lease expires.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In the past, we've had multiple discussions about selling the county farm. I think this year, especially because we are in need, in my estimation, of holding the tax rates to the current level, and we're facing an uphill climb of about $2.6 million. I realize half of that may be predicated on new jail staff, but at the same time, we have a source of revenue. I believe that we should take these and return it, as was mentioned earlier, to private hands. And this is based on the old county home and predicated on indigent farming. And so with that, we can reduce the tax rate up to 17.5 cents, or about $1 million each of these next fiscal years, and act as a bridge to potentially having a revenue source so that we can keep tax rates the same. So with that, I just want to clarify what I'm going to move is to approve the sale of the county farm with the possession date upon sale, but honoring the current lease between Woodbury County and the lessee. So with that, I would move it for discussion.
Second.
A motion by Taylor, second by Young. I guess first question I'm going to have is, do we have to designate where the funds go immediately, or can we just have that go to reserves and then designate as we go? I'd hate to bridge a gap on a budget with one-time funds and then not have that in the future, is my concern.
Well, this bridging here is really to help get to the process of actually getting federal prisoners by 24-25 fiscal year. The half of whatever the farm sells for, and you'll set the base, the basic, except for the auctioneer or sealed bids. But the $1 million will cover next fiscal year, 22-23, then cover half the next 23-24, and by 24-25, we better have a good idea if we have federal prisoners or not, because the jail will be open July 1st of 23. So this is really a one-time expenditure. We're at the max in the debt service for the bonds, everything, the lease, the additional lease. This is the worst case scenario, so it does help to do whatever the number is for 23, budget year in 24, then 24, 25, we won't need that additional revenue. We'll have federal money coming in. So it's probably really the best way to do it if you're going to sell the farm.
I would want to break it up into a 2-year increment, so to speak, so we don't take it all off of the debt service the first year and then not have any bridge, so to speak, the next. So
I think it just feels like a weak Band-Aid to solve a temporary problem. I'm opposed.
Mr. Chair, question for Joshua or whoever knows the process. With the survey and the abstract done or soon to be done, is the next step simply just scheduling with an auctioneer, or does the board need to take any further action in order to set a reserve or things like that?
The board does need to determine exactly how they want to do the sale, whether it's to an auctioneer or bids, and how the board desires to split up the parcels or give options for that. Ultimately, when the specific plan is determined, a public hearing will need to be set, just like any other property sale that we do. We'll publish notice in the paper and we'll hold the public hearing. And after that public hearing, then the sale itself can take place, and that would be contingent upon whatever process the board has set out. If we go through an auctioneer, they typically have a timeline as far as, and they would recommend what they would suggest for time to advertise it and put all those things in place before the sale actually occurs. I don't think we have the actual survey in hand yet, do we, Dennis?
No, I'm supposed to call them Thursday, the 20th, Thursday, Friday, whatever the 20th is. He had a family situation, so he was a little slow on getting it, but hopefully we'll have it by Friday. Because the sale has to occur for us to reduce next year by June 1st. So we do have time, I think, to get it done if we go through the process here to have it sold by June 1st. Shouldn't take that long, should it, Joshua?
I would think we could get it done by June 1st if that's what we need to do.
So would the next step next week then be to set a public hearing and then to engage an auctioneer or have some sort of contractual service for the actual sale?
If you're sticking the money in reserves, you could do it at any time, use reserves on June 1st.
If you're gonna use that 2 million, or whatever the dollar amount, they say dollar amount, but whatever you get, put in reserves, use for something else, then you got a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
This isn't really a Band-Aid.
Well, no, I'm still saying you're gonna use it for what we specified using for, but if it's in reserves, then we
It's
determine.
unspecified, then where are you gonna use it? You should have an idea where you're gonna use it, because you can't use it for operating costs. You can't use it for like sheriff's vehicles, because that occurs every year. You wanna use it for something that's gonna occur every year. So this, if you're gonna do it, this is probably the best solution.
I'm just saying to take away the deadline, and then at that point, when it does sell, say if it was July 1st, then we could specify what to do with it.
But I think Jeremy'd like to take advantage of doing it half and half, so we can get
Sure.
it into next year's budget. Or half of it, and half the next fiscal year.
I think it's
Yeah,
probably
we don't
not
need
too
to-
overly aggressive to think you could sell it by June 1st though either, so.
I agree.
So I'm fine with leaving it the way it is.
I think so. Mr. Alexander is.
Jeremy, do y'all have a price set on that yet?
We
Have
don't.
you, no offers or anything on, and how many acres is that?
What's the 204?
We
That's
think we had an
part
appraisal.
of the reason for the survey is to determine the exact acreage. There was an appraisal that was done, what, a year ago, a little less than a year ago?
And the land since then's gone up 28%, since that analysis there.
In determining whether to set, or where to set a reserve price or how to sell, the board would potentially have the option of holding a closed session on that issue, so that it wouldn't be disclosed during that discussion or prematurely. So I want to make the board aware of that as well.
The board will have to make a determination too, if they want, there are 3 parcels, there's one north of 141, south of 141, and then the big chunk.
So just for your information, 3 parcels of Cloud Farm sold down by Odo on the 10th. 3 different parcels. It's in the hills, but some of it's pretty flat. $11,000, $12,000, and $13,000 per acre. So now's the time to sell. County has no business being in the land ownership business. Get it sold, get the money for whatever you all need to use it for. So again, I appreciate you looking into it, and for goodness sake, now's the time.
I got to agree with you there. That's kind of my opinion that we shouldn't be in the land rental business in the first place unless it's a situation that warrants it, like our gravel area.
Sure. Question. Joshua, when I think the board's been approached by more than one entity that would like to facilitate this sale. Should the board make that decision in a regular board meeting as for who we're going to go with, or is that also a closed session item?
Ultimately, a vote would be an open session, but it's something that could be discussed within the closed session. The parameters, it's one of the parameters of a potential sale. So before the board is ready to disclose that, it's something that could be talked about in closed session.
Okay.
Like an RFQ process or whatever?
That could be done, yeah. It's a service. There's not any requirement in the code that would follow a particular process for selecting an auctioneer. But we could put out a request for proposals, or we could contact various auctioneers. It's really up to the board and how we select it.
Well, do we have our motion in second? I don't remember.
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion from the board? Anyone else? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1. Moving on to 13B, approve proceeds go to debt service obligations for 23 and 24.
And I would just move it and clarify 50/50, if that's not already implied.
Okay, so we have a motion, I'll second. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, passes 5-0. Moving on to 13C, approve the military differential pay policy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is a follow-up to last week's item, which was became informational, really. But this policy provides employees deployed overseas differential pay between military pay and county-based compensation. This isn't a mandate, nor is it a requirement, but akin to what we did, in my estimation, with law enforcement when we allowed for their families, should they, God forbid, fall in the line of duty, to stay on family health insurance. This honors the sacrifices of those who are deploying and are making a lesser wage by answering that call to service. Policy, in my estimation, and speaking with Melissa, I don't think has a great financial impact, since the county does not pay health care benefits during the time that a service member is deployed, nor pay for that service member's family. It's picked up by TRICARE, and so for family health insurance reasons, that's about $19,000 a year. I think we surveyed maybe 8 service members who are county employees, and I think you were saying maybe only 1 would potentially qualify. And I did speak to the Director of Veteran Affairs that she herself may. But
she might. I didn't speak to one person, but the others I did reach out to would not have qualified for this, the differential pay.
So I think it's fairly minimal, but it's a good gesture for those. It follows in the steps of Polk County. And just to make a couple other points clear, this policy applies to full-time Woodbury County employees, excluding members of the Board of Supervisors. So full disclosure, I would not ever take advantage of this. And it's for deployment outside of the contiguous United States for a period of 90 days or greater. So this isn't for an annual training, going to a school for a month or 2. This is going to Iraq or Kuwait or Djibouti or wherever those folks may be deployed. The other thing that I would clarify is that all of the compensation of the military member, including their base pay, basic housing allowance, hazardous pay, and combat pay, would be calculated. And we do end with a time certain, meaning that the service member must make application showing their leave and earnings statement, and it shall not occur more than 60 days after returning back home, meaning that you can't apply for this 6 months, a year after returning, and then have us be in a different fiscal year. So with that, I can take any questions before moving.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
It's the first time we've probably heard following in the footsteps of Polk County. In the procedure, something I see that I don't think was discussed in previous weeks is that 60 days application. You can't apply beyond that. Is this utilized while the member is deployed, though, or is this typically something that's applied for when they return and then receive? I would think the pay would be received while they're deployed, so this is just a deadline?
I think that would be the goal.
Okay.
So the family would receive the pay while the family member is gone. This just gives them, like he mentioned, a 60-day, window to apply when they get back, just in case they had to go real fast and, some of the paperwork didn't get done. So,
What does the application look like?
I think it will ask where they go, how long they'll be gone, see their orders, ask about the pay and how much each division is being paid.
And my goal in the 60 days is just so we don't get into a situation where someone comes home and they say, well, I deployed 8 months ago and now I'm owed all of this back pay. And say, well, look, you had to have made that within, I think 60 days is a generous amount of time once you're readjusted and reacclimated.
Thank you.
So with that pending any other discussion, I would move to approve the military differential pay policy.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Ung. Out of curiosity, we have it as a policy and a resolution. Is there a reason we do both? Okay.
I think, not that Polk County always does everything right, the point's well taken, but I think they had it as both, and so in this particular instance, the resolution be signed by the Board of Supervisors as a whole.
All right, any other questions or discussion on this item? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to 13D, approve the military deferential pay resolution.
I'd move it.
I'll second. Motion by Taylor, second by Radig. Any other discussion on this? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to items 14A from Matthew. Approval to elect the 10 million standard allowance permitted by the U.S. Treasury ARPA final rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the board bearing with a few different items on this, as there's a lot to unpack in the wake of Treasury releasing the long-awaited final rule. As everyone knows, it's over 400 pages and has quite a few improvements to the ways that counties can utilize this money. So this is, I want to make clear, this is split into two separate motions and discussions. I would think the first motion would be more ministerial and the second would determine where this money is actually allocated. And to go forward, there are several pages in Treasury's document that outline this rationale for completely upending and improving one of the four categories of eligible use. So the four categories of eligible use are revenue loss, replacing lost public sector revenue, 2, public health and economic impacts, 3, premium pay, and 4, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Now, the one that was changed the most was the revenue loss category, the very first one. This allows for a $10 million standard allowance of recovery funds to be spent on government services. Government services generally include any service traditionally provided by a government, to quote the rules. Also, to quote, government services are the most flexible eligible use category under the program, and funds are subject to streamlined reporting and compliance requirements. This allows spending again on any general government service that includes equipment, even police cars, administration, staff, facilities. Iowa State Association of Counties noted that this is, quote, the most significant piece of this final rule is the flexibility it gives local government. And I just want to hammer that home because we've received comments that would seem to indicate that this restricts Woodbury County in some way. It's exactly the opposite. By allowing this $10 million standard allowance, Woodbury County can use 10 of the $20 million we will receive on basically any general government service. There's several excerpts. I won't read all of them in the background. Hopefully you have had a chance to look at it. The keys are broader flexibility and greater simplicity in the program, easing the burden on recipients, and basically treating this like a shortcut way of calculating revenue loss, just like on your personal taxes. You may take the time to itemize, but if you don't have the time or it doesn't make sense, you'll take the standard deduction. It's the exact same concept. It states Treasury still does not have pre-approved uses of funds, and recipients are asked to review the final rule and the interim final rule because the final rule does not actually go into effect until April, and until that time, counties can basically choose to utilize either one of them and still remain in compliance. So it's not as if the final rule is published and everything previously done is illegitimate. It is there's simply a waiting period and a grace period, so to speak. So just to provide an overview of where the funds are, unlike many counties, Woodbury County has not spent any of this money yet. We've made allocations in the interim report, but the expense reports have not been completed yet because we haven't spent the money. We currently have just over $10 million in fiscal recovery funds. We will receive the second tranche of that exact amount in May. So for all intents and purposes, if the board wanted to budget based upon the full 20 million in the next fiscal year, that's a possibility. I see no reason why this board would not want to begin by electing the $10 million standard allowance, simply because going about it the previous way of actually calculating, using their formula, I believe it's 5.1% of lost revenue, probably wouldn't get us to the 10 million. And I've discussed this with Joshua and also the eligible uses for this money. So again, this is excellent news. It applies to, I believe, 70% of counties have less than this amount. So most counties are simply going to be able to just use this in their general budget or however they see fit. But again, this is just coincidentally, corresponds with what we have currently in the bank, so to speak. So are there any thoughts or questions on selecting the standard allowance?
So this motion is just on electing the standard allowance, and is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is, again, there's 4 eligible use categories. All of them are eligible uses for this money. The major change here is that the first category became extremely broad and extremely friendly to local governments getting this money out the door.
Any reason why this board would not elect the standard allowance, or we're on fairly solid ground just on that point alone? Is that just making that motion to an approval of that?
I mean, the final rule is still fairly fresh. I have spent a fair amount of time with it. And we haven't issued any sort of written opinion, but I think that everything that Matthew said in relation to the standard allowance and the flexibility that there is with it, I would agree with. You don't have the restrictions on capital expenditures or directing it towards a specific COVID mitigation use under the standard allowance like you do in the other categories. So, yeah, this doesn't give me any heartburn.
So is this the correct process too, just to say we elect it? Or
So
is there an application
The board would
process
make the
that we have
decision,
to
and
go
my
through?
understanding is that, and whatever the reporting process is to the Treasury on the next time a report is due, we would indicate that we're electing the standard allowance.
Which we got to report by the end of January 31st.
So this is timely.
Thank you. I think that's important. I think it's important that we consulted our county attorney. I'm appreciative of that. We're following the advice, as far as the rules go. And so I'd be supportive of the motion.
I'll move to elect the standard allowance of $10 million to spend on government services as permitted by the U.S. Treasury's ARPA final rule.
Second.
We got a motion by Young, second by Taylor on item 14A. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to 14B.
Thank you. Now, this is a motion to potentially decide how these $10 million are expended. I had put in the packet here an alternative idea because currently the board is operating under a motion to fund the expenses, the overage on the law enforcement center in the amount of $15.6 million. Through the allocation reports, we've allocated that money as was allowed under the interim final rule under the category of public health and economic response. With the final rule, we now know that category needs to be changed to public sector revenue, so in the very least, that amount of money will be allocated in the first category. However, so we have an option of how to utilize this money and whether to use it in the fiscal year budgeting process or simply to pay for things as they come up. I had suggested here to appropriate the $10 million to the upcoming budget for the Law Enforcement Center and Sheriff's Administration and crime prevention budgets, rather than use local property tax revenues, simply because I consulted our project manager on the project, on the jail project, and was told in roughly the next year there won't be a need for these monies to go to the project. They would be the last to be spent, and it's a long process. It's going to take all of next year, obviously, to build a new law enforcement center. So with that, I thought, let's use it to help the current budget picture and offset and find other ways to allocate money that we save to the law enforcement center project that we committed to already. We still have that commitment on the books, and we still had full board support at the time for that. That said, I understand there is some hesitation that's probably going to be reflected from the county attorney's office in trying to keep Woodbury County safe in the way that we spend these monies. And there is a prohibition, there's very few prohibitions on the standard allowance money. They are, you can't use it for above and beyond pensions, to repay debt service, and to directly or indirectly replenish reserves. That's something that could be subject to interpretation in my mind. You have eligible expenses as one step, and then the county can take other steps as it desires to cause the budget to go in any direction in any other budget, in any other department, I mean. But that is a risk. And so I asked our county attorney's office a very direct question, which I think the public would love to hear, and that is, does using the $10 million in the standard allowance towards the law enforcement center project comport with the final rule? Joshua?
Well, I think we touched on this in the last agenda item, but out of that 10 million standard allowance, there's the ability to use it on governmental services, and governmental services include spending on infrastructure, roads, capital projects, and it would include the construction of the new jail. So in my opinion, it's a very safe conclusion under the rules that any or all of that 10 million of the standard allowance could go to the jail project.
Thank you. I want to,
Now, we're going to go through board
interrupt,
questions.
but you can speak. So, as I was saying, the board has previously committed to fund this cost overrun, and so this is a vital piece of that. If the board chooses to take no action on this, that's kind of a default funding of the project through this means, through the spending reports, because we've already committed to that. I think it would be proper to make a motion to do that, rather than my previous suggestion here of using it within the next budget year. Mr. Taylor, you look like you had some thoughts.
I do, but I don't want you to cut yourself short either.
Oh, that's fine. So, again, I hope that the public heard what the county attorney's office just said. We've been beat over the head by the public, certain members of the public, I should say, some from out of our county, calling misappropriation, calling for clawbacks, calling for us to publicly rescind motions. the final rule allows us to use $10 million to fund the new jail project.
Can I ask you some questions,
Yeah.
Supervisor? So it seems to me like we're talking about two different things, unless I'm confused. It seemed like D was talking about the Law Enforcement Center Authority project, a physical building, and then B was talking about different operational expenses, salaries, administration, crime prevention, things of that nature that are government services, which are clearly allowable. And so in my mind, there's two different $10 million of buckets. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I don't have any issue with your agenda item because I think we're not talking about an actual law enforcement center physical infrastructure within your first agenda item. We're talking about administration, crime prevention, ongoing budget expenses. Is that correct?
The option put forward originally was what you are describing. However, what I'm describing now is using the $10 million bucket of funds within the public sector revenues category to fund the cost overruns on the jail. And there will be another $10 million allocation in May that we will need to follow the three other categories. We can't.
But that's much more restrictive,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so I guess that's my only worry is that there may be, and this is, I have no preconceived anything here. My only worry is that some of those things in the second $10 million bucket that have to do with COVID mitigation and HVAC and water may be more geared toward a building and a physical infrastructure. And this $10 million in the first category is really, really open to anything else. So I'm supportive of your original one. My only heartburn was the approximate $515,000 in new staff that I think we need to have a separate discussion on, but would welcome it otherwise if there were things like the medical examiner or emergency paramedics or crime prevention to fill up that. But I think it's certainly allowable. So I almost don't want you to walk back from that, except for that one point of I don't want to fund new staff with one-time federal funding that we know won't be there. But in terms of funding the governmental services that the law clearly says you can do, and I do think things like paramedics and medical examiner and crime prevention are somewhat related to COVID. I worry doing it the opposite, that we're going to box ourselves in when we get to category or bucket 2 and say, well, what do we do now?
Sure.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
And the only other thing I would say is I don't think if we don't make a decision tonight, and we can, but I don't think it'll hurt if we make a decision next week either. I just don't want to make the wrong one without tapping the brakes or measuring twice and cutting once. So those are just thoughts.
Well, there is certainly still opportunity to use I'll call it the second 10 million on the other three categories, potentially within portions of the jail. That may be something we rely more on legal counsel for. But the COVID mitigation improvements that are eligible, according to the final rule, include in enumerated eligible uses, quote, ventilation system installation and improvement. Our manager has identified a few $1 million of cost for the jail's HVAC system, which go above and beyond a normal HVAC system and which are designed to mitigate the spread of communicable airborne diseases. So, because the overage on the jail, as we'll discuss, is about $14.2 million, we can allocate the 10 towards the cost that we're going to have to pay for and still be able to take the second 10 million and find eligible uses within that budget department, including things that are listed as eligible as a public health response or other infrastructure. once again, the restriction on capital improvements that says you can't build new jails is only if you're spending that money through the public health and economic response. This is what people don't get or refuse to get, is that that's one of the categories that has its own conditions. So in regards to using this 10 million we're talking about now under the standard allowance, I think it makes sense to take the safest route and simply budget it for the cost overruns on the jail rather than use it for the upcoming budget because of the concerns relayed to me about the risk of replenishing indirectly reserves by plugging it into existing budget items. I see that as a two-step process, but I know there's room for interpretation there. So someone could argue, and knowing what this board's been through, someone will argue what I'm describing and say that's illegitimate use of the funds. So we have been told, and that we're not able to use 10 million towards the jail in category 2, but we've been told we can use it in category 1. There's no change to the board's direction, except now we have no question, there's no question at all that we can use this $10 million on general government services. And I'm suggesting we use it on an area that we've already committed to fund and which we were relying on originally. But the second 10 million, we could budget for it next week. We could budget for it by the end of 2024, I think, as long as we spend it by the performance period. And that would not be within this first category. Again, this would be responding to public health, premium pay for essential workers, or water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And we've talked about using one-time funds for ongoing expenses, and this would not be that. This would be a one-time project.
Joshua, do we know of any attorneys in the state of Iowa that are kind of experts on the entire process of this, like an outside counsel?
Well, I know we had searched for someone that was willing to give a definitive opinion at the time that we had the interim rule, and I don't think there was anyone that was willing to go out on a limb and do that at that time. I imagine everyone is still kind of in the same position that I am, in that they're reading through the rule and they're trying to figure out what it means. And then as time goes on, there'll be further interpretations from the Treasury. So there's still a fair amount of unknown. And Dennis can jump in if you know of anyone that's kind of eager to give opinions on the final rule, but I'm not at this point.
In the state of Iowa, no, but I know of another county that has sought outside attorneys' opinions, and they...
Who was that?
Sarby County.
Okay, sure.
They had outside opinion from a couple attorneys.
That was before the final rule, though, right?
Well, now with the final rule.
Okay.
And that they had a list up to 13 million worth of projects that they feel would qualify, and their attorneys agreed on a white paper. I think I don't know what a white paper is, but paper they can change, but they did agree with the recommendations they had. So the safest way to go, now that this has changed a little bit, is really to go the way Matthew's saying, follow the county attorney's advice, because there is that gray area. If we do it for these areas here, we aren't reducing the tax rate. We're still generating, so the money will go in. There is that gray area of replenishing reserves. This eliminates that entirely. It's totally legal to do. And then all we have to do for the second 10 million, for the 4.2 million, is come up with the projects that qualify under ARPA money. You still have 5.8 million left to do with something.
So I guess I'm pretty cautious on everything here. I see this, as 21 million that I'm not willing to risk losing. I wouldn't mind having a well-insured attorney give us an opinion as a fallback that if...
But the 10 million, the way, if you use general services, our attorneys confirmed it, there is no risk.
The risk is, in my opinion, is the second category is so restrictive then. I don't know, you say, well, we have 5.8 million to use for something. That something is a big something. And if you don't have dedicated projects, to me, the second category or bucket where it relates to public health and ventilation and spacing seems more appropriate for that. And bucket one you can use for anything. I mean, at some point, you can't use money, not decrease taxes, and not have it go to, I mean, I just think we don't need to, I think C we could eliminate on the,
Right.
here. But I just worry that we're gonna make this so restrictive on ourselves that we're gonna come to that second $10 million bucket and say, geez, I wish we, had used more things in here.
But that's always going to be the case. We're always going to have to find and adhere to the restrictions on the other three categories. The second category, which was the closest thing previously that we would have used to fund the law enforcement center, is no longer eligible.
Which was what?
That was the public health and economic response. There are prohibitions on capital expenditures, but you cannot use it to build new congregate facilities. As a response to crime or as a response to COVID-19, they expect you to, they expect that process to take longer than the performance period, most likely, because, this process took us several years, and there's not enough time for communities to actually gauge that, need in that way. So that's not eligible through that category. And it would be safer for us to use those second $10 million to fund HVAC improvements that help mitigate COVID in the courthouse rather than, which I know needs some work, rather than the law enforcement center. But we could look into that. But I'm saying anything we spend on the law enforcement center through the 10 million standard allowance is going to be prohibited in the other three categories. So that's why this is an approach like this, because this is how we fund the jail.
So just that second category, the second bucket you're saying can't be used for the law enforcement center?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that, I know it's safer in the first, but is that your opinion that you can't use any of that, even though it may have something to do with the fact that you have 234 people in a space that's designed for 90 right now, and you're going to design a facility for 448. I don't understand how that would not be COVID mitigation.
So I agree that it's a lot harder to get there in the second bucket of money, to put it in terms of what we're talking about now. That being because it's a capital expenditure, it's a new project. In the final rule, they introduced this concept of proportionality, and so you're arguing that an expenditure is a response to the pandemic and to COVID-19 mitigation. And the proportionality concept is basically, is what you're doing actually proportionally and laser focused to addressing the mitigation that's required. And as a general rule, it expresses that building an entirely new facility would not be proportional, because there's things that could be done to update an existing facility, whether the ventilation or the social distancing, those sorts of things. So I think that there's arguments that we can make in relation to the ventilation, and specifically, are there ways that the ventilation has been designed in a different manner to specifically address COVID-19? I think it helps us that our jail project was in progress before. It's not like we dreamt up doing the jail just because of COVID-19, but there's some adaptations that have been made to address COVID-19 issues. So we can make that argument for a portion of the ventilation and maybe some other items in the jail, but it's going to be difficult to get to, in my mind, to that full 10 million or anywhere close to that.
And that's where I disagree with, I don't like to characterize it as cost overruns. That's the only thing, we could target 3.8 million there in the second bucket toward that. and make that argument that you're increasing ventilation fourfold. We could do something at the courthouse. We could do something at district health. We can do things that are more targeted. I just worry if we take 10 million and we kind of categorize it as cost overrun, and then that's the first bucket that they say you could use for anything, and then we come to the second bucket, and now what do we do with it? I just find it overly restrictive is my worry.
I don't really understand what you're saying, because if we don't allocate the $10 million standard allowance to the LAC project, we don't have to say overruns, we could say any part of the project. Where is that money coming from?
Coming from the federal government. I mean, your original item, which I'm actually agreeing with, it was to fund things like crime prevention and staffing for administration and so on. That money comes from there. We dedicate it here, and come what may.
But it's the same amount of money. I mean, if you fund the current budget and you utilize 10 million of savings or new revenue, it's still 10 million.
Right. I just worry you get to the second bucket of money that is much more restrictive, and you had some things that you could have used at the law enforcement center, like air handlers and different things. And then that's off the table now because you've already used it on the sort of free, less restrictive category. So that's my only worry. I'm not trying to be an beginner. I just think that's my concern.
I just don't think that could ever be the case, though, given the size and scope and cost of the law enforcement center. There's 10 million in there, and there's also up to best case 10 million under the second category. Like Joshua said, I don't think we can get there to the full 10 million in the second category. The biggest ticket item is going to be the HVAC system. And I'm getting a nod from the project manager over there. And that's roughly 3 million, I believe, had been identified as potentially above and beyond for the whole facility for the purposes of COVID mitigation. So that's the biggest item, is around 3 million, unconfirmed. And if we find other items, we could spend the entire second, we only need 4.2 million more for the jail after, this first category. So then for sake of argument, we make that argument Josh was talking about. We file reports that $3 million of the HVAC system that costs way more than that is responding to COVID-19. Then we only need to come up with 1.2 million. And that's achievable.
In the COVID relief funds, you could use money for outside counsel to also help you make decisions, correct?
You could.
So go ahead.
The bottom line is the board is committing 14.2 million. Using the 10 million now for the facility, for infrastructure, which is legal, then you're only talking about 4.2 million that you have to justify instead of 10 million. It's much, much easier to do 4.2 million than try to justify 10 million, because we may not be able to. Then what do we do?
What are you doing with the other 5.8?
We don't know.
That's for us.
We don't know anything about where we're gonna allocate that extra, say, 5 million bucks. We don't have the jail, but there are guidelines there you can allocate. You go to nonprofits. You could do a lot of different things there. It's kind of opening a door, but there's a lot of things you can do with that extra 5 million. But for our commitment to the jail, 14.2, it used to be 15.5, but we got premium. But 14.2, we have to come up with that somewhere. And the easiest way is take the 10 million now and then try to justify the next 4.2, which we can through ventilation. It's a lot easier than saying you have to justify 10 million. That's going to be difficult, maybe. But the restrictions, I think we can get through it with the 4.2 million and dedicate the 10 million. That's all we're looking for. We'd have that problem any way we went, how we're going to spend it all.
Right.
So part of the
Problem.
final rule is if you're that second 10 million bucket for a capital expenditure, if the capital expenditure is over $1 million, as part of your reporting to the Treasury, you have to submit a written justification. And then they have an itemization of certain things that have to be in that written justification. Part of that written justification has to include at least 2 other comparable projects that you considered. You have to show that you actually, in good faith, considered these other projects as an alternative to what you're spending, and then basically, written statement of the pros and cons of each and why you went with the ultimate expenditure that you're requesting. So it is a fairly detailed and specific process that is required, and part of the reason that the written justification is there is because they basically start out by saying the capital projects are presumed to be ineligible, and as part of that, they reference what Matthew did earlier, the congregate living facility and the jails.
If it's under $1 million, you don't have to do the written justification. So if we can come up with $3 million, then we're short of $1.2 million, then you have maybe 2 or 3 different projects out there that we can do.
We have the justification, by the way, right? We explored air handlers that could fail at any moment. We explored how it was not feasible to have 234 people moved to transport.
Okay, but you have to remember that this is through the lens of COVID mitigation. So was our analysis through the lens of COVID mitigation, and again, that proportionality concept of, is what we're doing proportional to the problem that we're solving? But again, this bucket of funds has to be for the COVID mitigation piece. So I agree that we did that for the jail project as a whole, and there may be further legwork that would need to be done to show that specifically as it relates to COVID mitigation.
So I'm just going to say, personally, I'm not ready to do B through D here today. I want to hear from ISAC. I'd rather hear from outside counsel. But I'd like to hear,
Okay.
Not yet, we're still discussing as a board. I'll open up to public.
I have spent time reading the rule, discussing with Joshua, sat on a hour-long National Association of Counties conference call with legal counsel on the final rule, as well as an Iowa State Association of Counties call, as well as a webinar with U.S. Treasury. All of that cements the advice given by our board's attorney here that's already paid by the county on this $10 million. The $10 million here is the simplest portion, the very simplest portion of everything that we are getting from ARPA. And these issues with the second, quote, second $10 million will always exist. We're going to have roughly 3 years to appropriate that money and find eligible projects. I understand, Mr. Taylor, the hesitation, but I'm just telling you, there's never going to be a case with a tens of millions of dollars of a project where we're going to get into the second 10 million spending through public health and economic response with HVAC and all of this and say, oh, this was already covered. That's never going to be the case because there is more than there's more than the amount we have in the standard allowance that is part of that cost that the county has already committed to pay. So, Mr. Wright.
In other words, we already know of a couple of things related to the enforcement center that we believe that there's justification that's going to need to be made.
Sure, but that's a second discussion. Yes.
Right.
This discussion is to me very simple. We've committed to fund at this point $14.2 million. Our revenue for this in our motion earlier in the last year was ARPA. We know for a fact that ARPA allows this use of the funds. So we're simply reflecting that and reflecting it's from the standard allowance, so no one can say you're using, you're improperly allocating public health and economic response to the jail. They can't say that because we are appropriating it appropriately.
I don't think anybody disagrees with you on that, on the first bucket that it's legal to do that.
Okay.
Anybody up here anyway. I think the problem is not having it as more of a holistic to say what could have been over here that could, maybe it does decrease our annual operating by $400,000 because we funded something here and that, could have been funded in bucket 2. But now we already dedicated it. there.
Well, we'll still have
That's-
10 million in May that we can use for the upcoming budget. We'll still have $10 million coming in May to do all of that, even for the next budget year.
In the
Does that
second
make
bucket,
sense?
more
Yes.
restrictive funds.
Yes.
And that's only my only issue is that they're more restrictive without looking at everything altogether. That's my only.
Okay, well, this
worry.
goes back to the whole, I was cautioned by the board's attorney that, to use it on existing expenses is less safe than using it on future current expenses.
With the express intent of building up reserves, correct?
So the rule is very clear that the fund cannot be used to increase reserves. So whether that's done directly through a transfer from, the COVID account to the reserve account, I mean, that's clearly explicitly contrary to the rule. There's an indication in the rule that indirectly increasing the reserves would also be frowned upon. The risk is if the Treasury determines that what you did with the money ultimately did increase the reserve and violated the rule, then the process is that there's an appeal process and all that, but once all that's complete, the county would have 60 days to pay the funds back to the Treasury, and basically you would forego being able to use those funds on anything. So there's a significant risk there if the Treasury were to determine that the use increased reserves in an impermissible manner. So I would be very surprised if outside counsel would be willing to go out on a limb and say anything other than that, because the risk is there in the rule, in the recoupment process related to the reserves. So if outside counsel, like I said, I would be surprised if they're willing to do that. But the other thing is, as time goes on, if there's, there could be further interpretations of the rule from the Treasury. Let's say if this first 10 million stays in the county's COVID account and we don't have any payouts over the next year at budget time, you still have the permissible uses and there may be more guidance. But if it's clear that at that point that, and I don't know what the timeline is for, when invoices are going to be due and things like that, but I guess what I'm saying is down the road, if it's clear that more of that 10 million could go towards the jail, or there's further guidance on the reserve issue, then you still have access to that, do something different with that first 10 million if it's still there in the account.
What could potentially provide more clarity, just what other counties are doing, and if there are lawsuits brought by use of those funds, how will we know more if we wait a little longer?
Interpretations from the Treasury. I mean, there's not going to be more, we have the final rule and we have the comments to the rule. But through enforcement actions and to some extent letter guidance, there is more indication that can be given along the way. Also, there's safety in numbers. I mean, if we know that numerous other counties are doing things in a certain way and we can reach out and hear a little bit of their analysis, I think that sometimes there is that safety in numbers.
Is it safe to say, Joshua, we can't use this for any operating services? Because by doing so, without the ability to lower taxes, we're going to increase reserves. And so really there's nothing that we can do in the first category except this one-time jail expense, because anything that we do on an operating services is going to increase reserves. So this is really, would your guidance be, this is the only thing that we can do?
I think that this is clearly the safest route to go. Otherwise, you run the risk of the interpretation that you increase the reserves indirectly and it'd be subject to recoupment. And it kind of makes sense logically because the first 10 million pot Basically, the standard allowance is for the purpose of lost revenue or replacing lost revenue. So if, you put the pencil to paper and the county, whatever that amount of the lost revenue was, if it's, when you go through the formula, close to that 10 million, then it's easier for a county that actually had close to that 10 million in loss of revenue to just, okay, we're replacing that revenue. Then you don't run into the issue of increasing reserves or lowering the tax rate because you truly are replacing revenue. But we may be in a bit of a unique circumstance where we don't have the actual loss of revenue. So then it frees up some of that 10 million.
I guess, again, my opinion, but changed mental health reasons and sought outside counsel for that, and that was what over $1 million, a couple $1 million a year. This outside counsel's paid for. If they have a good insurance policy and the counsel is incorrect, we have a fallback.
But you already had 3 organizations, GFOA, NACO, ISAC, reviewing by Matthew, county attorney's opinion. I think the safest way to go, and Jeremy kind of had a point there, there's no way we can use money, say the general basic fund, without increasing reserves, and that's a slippery slope. I kind of agree with Joshua, that's a very slippery slope. So the easiest way, most safest way is to take the first 10 million, dedicate to the jail, because there's no questions asked on that. We're always going to have questions on the second one, potentially. But that's the safest action you can take today is do that. And then the second 10 million, we don't have to even obligate that till by December 24. But we have this cycle here. We have the 2022, we'll do the 23-24 budget. In 24-25 budget, we do it in the spring of 24. So we actually got this plus 2 more budget periods on the actual 10 million. But we have to come up with 14.2 million to complete the jail project. We're committed to that. We're actually committed to 15,575,000. We're reducing that because of the premium. But we're going to have to come up with it. And if you use 10 million now, it's a lot easier to come up with 4.2. And we always had this problem, how are we going to spend the extra money that we didn't dedicate to the jail? That's a problem we have to address in the next 2 years.
I have absolutely no issue with using, other advice on the more restrictive categories. I'm just, again, proposing the safest option, which is different than what I started with. I started with ongoing expenses because of the timing issue. I'd like it to help sooner than later, but the guidance, legal guidance and the letter of the law or the letter of the rule is quite clear that new expenses are safer avenue, and we have a new expense to allocate it towards.
Now, the second, like you're saying there, if we need additional attorneys besides Joshua, I don't think we do. Then on that second 10, then you can get some advice from other attorneys in it if we don't agree with Joshua. I think you gotta go with Joshua, he's your legal counsel. But this is a delicate and an issue that nobody's tackled. So that's what I would say.
And I'm not cutting off any discussion, but I would like to make the motion to appropriate $10 million from current fiscal recovery funds using the standard allowance allowed by the final rule towards the Law Enforcement Center project.
Second.
I guess, so we have a motion by Ung, second by DeWitt.
I think I can go with that as long as we're deleting C and D.
Yeah, those will
In other
be
words,
changed
if-
substantially, yes.
But I would like to see this board in that second bucket really be scrutinizing and careful, and every single thing listed out with the justification and review by our county attorney and or outside, that's where I've kind of come full circle. I think I can get on board with this because I do think that this was in part response to COVID and rising prices, but it's allowable, obviously. But I do want that second, but I want to be very cautious and judicious and that which is much more restrictive.
I would agree.
You still need to do D, because you gotta reduce what you originally said down to what you had to say.
We'll get to that.
Okay, I thought he wanted to eliminate C and D.
Well, we're not there yet. It'll be changed. It's-
Okay, any other board discussion on it? Okay, well, any public discussion?
Maria Ronquist, Sioux City, Iowa. I sent you an email to the 5 of you regarding the 10 million funds to use 20%, 25% of community COVID recovery funds to cushion just one department, the law enforcement center. To me, it's a misappropriation of federal taxpayers' funds. And I'm speaking on behalf of the community as a community activist and also as in close communication with the United States Treasurer. I will suggest to all of you to rescind your decision to misappropriate 15.6 million of COVID funds to cushion 31% inflated costs of the Woodbury County Law Enforcement Center. I would like you to begin to establish an open dialogue with the citizens. The citizens ask a dialogue and asking for input. Ask for input for the community, to the community as a public official. They're crying for input. It's a lot of money, and money is not easy. Thank God we have this money because we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know if you have seen the statistics. I don't know if you really care about this community. There is food scarcity here, houseless people. There is COVID rising in the community, in the county. And there are other needs in this community that you need to see. Ask the community. It's their money, not the public elected. That's your job as an elected official. You need to ask for input and dialogue. I ask you to rescind your decision. The prisons here is not an urgent thing. There's other urgent things that in the community. So I would recommend public input. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public that?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah, this is Dave Bashaw, United Today, Stronger Tomorrow, address 17783 Palace. I do want to say that I appreciate the hesitation from this board and the level-headedness that I've listened to tonight. With the final ruling coming out and more clarity around the Treasury's rule, it sounds like there's a more measured approach with the ARPA funds rather than the potential misappropriation without public input. I would have to echo what some folks said. You know, there's years there is left to spend this funding. And it's extremely important and reaffirmed by the Treasury to seek public input on the expenses. Some of the expenses, just right off the top of the expenditure breakdown, aside from testing for COVID, would be food programs, rent, mortgage, and utility aid, cash transfers, money right into folks' hands. But, the thing is my work with UTSP in the region, I'm not coming in with an outside influence. We're simply asking for public input on these funds, not coming in with any kind of agenda calling for it to be spent this or that way, just for public input. And that's what we're asking, and that's what the treasurer recommends. So I'd say, y'all will do whatever you're going to do with the first rule. You're right, it is, a little bit more lenient depending on the way that you interpret it. But with at least the second amount of funding, I strongly encourage just taking public input, doing public surveying of what the communities are identifying as needs, the folks on the ground, the working class, and then publishing those survey results to be shown coinciding with what decisions are made with the second funds. I just encourage that, but I really appreciate the hesitancy, and I hope you have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Shane Albrecht, 600 Maverick Lane, Madrid, Iowa. Some questions were raised, so I asked Hausman to give a monthly draw estimate so that we can understand how much money of their project was going to be needed. So I thought it would be something good to share with you, so it would be kind of on record, okay? Basically, from January of 2023, so a year from now, to June, the end of June, which is when the project will complete, Hausman would need roughly $10 million. The authority would need $10 million to pay their bills for that month. I mean, that time frame, that 6 months I just laid out, their bills will total $10 million, okay? So as the project's going, as it gets older, the draws start getting smaller and smaller. So when we get to the shortfall, or however you want to classify that, the need for the 15.5 or the 14.2, wherever you want to go with that number starts basically November is where that first, there's money that needs to go there. That's the other $5 million. And then from January to July 1, their overall bills will total $10 million approximately, okay? I just thought that was easy for me to say so that you're seeing a picture for your 15.6 commitment when you're having to come up with that money, okay? You can go through whatever process you want, public input, that's not right. The second point I wanted to make, the number everybody's talking about for, because we sat in on all these things. So when we looked at the HVAC, when we talk about HVAC, we're not talking about what the actual units cost. That's not what it is. There's added, increased fan speed, increased fans to provide additional ventilation because of COVID. So we've looked at proportional things. There's UV lights that are added to these units that wouldn't have been added to these units if they were not designed during COVID. So those, you still need an attorney's opinion, but that's where the numbers that Matthew is talking about. It's not the whole units. It's targeted pieces of those units to make them be proportional to what they're helping to mitigate. That's all I had, unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Shane. And his role is really to help us break down and file these expense reports for the more challenging categories.
And I would want to clarify that while certain members of the population aren't here to voice their concerns, I've had numerous people contact me and say it's the most common sense decision to use some of that funding for that project because the project clearly came in higher due to COVID. And, anybody that's bought anything in the last 2 years knows and understands everything's a little bit more expensive. So, that being said, any other discussion? All right, so with the revised 14B movement, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that passes 5-0. We're going to probably delete C, correct?
Correct.
I'll move to delete C.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Taylor. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? D, should we bring back with the revised numbers?
Yes. Randy. So this is simply to reflect the appropriate and accurate number that is required or requested from the county board by the Law Enforcement Center Authority. It was motioned in June of 2021 to allocate approximately $15.6 million. including portions of both tranches of ARPA funds. However, you'll see in the breakdown in the bond pricing that the second part of the bonds of $25 million sold for a premium due to lower interest rates, which everyone can identify with. So that's where that $3.9 million in additional funding comes from, as you take the amount above and beyond the $25 million and you subtract the expenses. We did, as part of the overall picture, anticipate $2.5 million of these costs. That's why there was an agenda item revision made to reflect that in the total calculus. So the actual amount which we would need to obligate is $14.2 million. There's no reason for the board to keep a motion on the books that says 15.6. And as I say, somewhat snarkily in my item, we need to spell this out in an updated motion, not only to be transparent, but to allow protesters the opportunity to update their poster boards and websites that all say 15.6 million. So I would move to approve reduced funding means of $14.2 million necessary towards Woodbury County LAC Authority project costs from county funds, and I would say including eligible ARPA funds.
Second for discussion.
So is that correct numbers where we're supposed to be here, Dennis?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I understand what this motion is doing as the slowest one up here. So this doesn't do anything to go into the second category of funding that we talked about tonight? And this is because we are bridging that gap based on the premium of about 3.9?
That's why you can lower it, because we estimate 2.5 million in revenue, premium and higher. So that's why Matthew is right, correcting this down to 14.2. And that gives confidence the authority of the board still is committed, totally.
But part of that is from the 10 that we just talked about, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
10 million, so we're looking for 4.2 million worth of projects that will qualify under ARPA, out of the second 10 million. Come up with other funds.
Whether it be reserves or...
Yeah, simply to update the proper number.
Is there...
This is replacing a motion made
Yes.
when?
June 2021.
It said 15.6 million.
Right, but there's nothing that's saying that we're doing 4.2 out of the other?
No.
No,
Okay.
because he's got that in their county funds,
As,
eligible
yeah.
ARPA, and general reserves.
Yeah, as before, it was simply a commitment that the LAC authority really would like to have for obvious reasons. And it illustrates, the general moving parts involved with constructing a $50+ million jail. Did the county or the authority perfectly predict COVID cost increases? No, of course not. Did the county perfectly predict interest rates would go even lower and give us a premium on our bonds? No, of course not. So, it's important to note that because there's some public confusion, it seems, at times of what the referendum was for. The referendum was to build a jail as designed and to bond for the amount that was listed on the referendum. The vote was to borrow that amount of money. It was not a promise that that would be the exact cost at the end of the day, as hard as that is to grasp for some. So the voters did not vote, to use this example, for us to get $1.5 million extra, but they got it. The referendum is now funded with $54.2 million, even though they voted on 50.3. So not everything is bad news, is my point.
So in your background item, you had it as 10 million fiscal recovery funds and 5 million, or is this is the old, is this the old text?
Sorry?
The language is different between what came out earlier.
Oh, yes, the motion.
That's historical here, motion by Munson, second by Raddick.
Oh, you're looking at the old motion?
Yes.
Yeah, looking at the background of the 10 million of ARPA funds and the 5.576 million of ARPA funds,
That number's changed.
Yeah, we
right,
were
down
pledged-
to,
4.2.
We're down 1.4, from 15.6 to 14.2.
Right.
And
the
we're also saying,
15.6 goes into, has to go into the other 10 million, right?
No, the 15.6 is no longer accurate because of the revenue we got on the second half of the bonds. That's recent, relatively recent, that we received more in the bonding than we anticipated, so.
Now, there's also another factor, and if Shane wants to speak up to this, there are costs that are estimated in the project. I'll give you an idea, contingency fund. Say they put in $1 million or $2 million, $3 million. That contingency may not be spent, it could all be spent, but if it isn't spent, then that money can come back and reduce the dependency on funds from the county.
What did we save in the premium, please?
Premium, 3.9 million, we estimate 2.4, so drop 1.4 million, approximately.
so 1.4.
So you got 1.5 from that,
Yep,
okay? You got 10 from the first ARPA funds,
yep.
okay? So there's 11.5, correct? How do we get to 14.2?
You have the 10 million.
Because 2.5 was anticipated, so we're only saving almost 1.5, so that's 15.6 minus 1.4/5.
This total amount minus the difference here.
Our net savings is a little less than 1.5 million, so it's 15.6 minus that.
So it saves the
Yeah,
county
well,
basically from having to come
that's
up
what
with
the motion was back in June or July. So now the motion is to change to this dollar amount, but using county funds, including ARPA funds and reserves and probably lost and.
I think I understand your point. Your point is.
Where's the money
make
coming from?
The commitment to the law enforcement center reflect the changes that have taken place and the difference between the 10 plus 1. I understand what you're getting at, but I think all we're doing is changing that. The commitment was 15.6, but because circumstances have changed, that commitment now is 14.2. However we get there, we're going to get to the 14.2 through the 10, through the 1.5, through the sale of the farm, et cetera, et cetera.
Sale of the farm doesn't have any.
Right?
Unless we choose to in the future change that, we can change that.
But you have to come up with 14.2.
The whole point was that the authority wasn't able to move forward unless we were guaranteeing some way that the county was going to fill the gap.
Correct.
So this was a motion to fill the gap.
Right.
This is a motion to change the wording of how we're going to fill the gap and how much we're filling it by.
Because
Yeah, I don't get it.
the premium was estimated, so the premium went up, our gap went down. You're just rotating around.
Premium was worth $1.5 million.
1.4,
Premium was 3.983.
Okay.
And we estimate
1.4 more than what it was before.
than what we'd estimate. So then we take it off of funds needed from the county to get it down to 14.2.
Okay.
And that could change too. You want to say anything?
Okay. So right now, and the only way this happens is by authority-approved change order, there's 1.63 in a contingency fund. That contingency fund is for things on the jail that come up. So it's a contingency dollars that are put there. But if there isn't need for that money as the project's going on, then that money will never need to be reimbursed either to the authority because they won't have spent it, so they won't need it. So what there is in our budget, so that we weren't having to come to you anytime there was a change order, because if we didn't have contingency dollars, every time there was a $25 change to a $2 million change, we would have to come before the county board of supervisors and ask for your approval before the authority could approve it, because they don't have other money. You know, they only have what's allocated. So there is a contingency fund that's put in place. Again, it's $1.6 million to pay for errors, oversights, things we need on the project, so that we don't have to come back for you. But the authority members then have to manage that through their board for approval to keep those costs underway. That's what I think Dennis was asking for me to share with you, okay?
If they don't spend it, it'll reduce what we have to send to them. So if they don't spend $1 million, of that $1.6 million, that comes off the 14.2.
So you're asking for $14.2 million less, and you're not touching the second bucket?
No, we're telling them we're not touching, we're telling them we're planning to do at least 10 million from this source. So we're not actually designating any source other than we're going to use county funds to fill the gap for the authority.
So when we came before you, Jeremy, in June, for you guys to make this decision, the second set of bonds had not been sold yet. There was a premium estimated that when the second bond that sold in October or November, when it sold, they estimated that premium on the bonds would be 2.5 and a little bit of change, 2.5 million, okay? When the bonds actually sold, they sold with $3.9 million worth of premiums, which was a net increase of $1.4 million. Mm-hmm. So all Matthew's doing is taking the $1.4 million off the 15.6 and just aligning your motion, because right now you have promised that you would give 15.6 back in June. You'd give $15.6 million, and he's just asking to give 14.2.
Where did the $15.6 million come from?
At the time, we were pledging
Two things of ARPA funds, correct?
Yeah, well, we said, if possible, when we put the motion together, because we didn't know, there was no even preliminary rules at the time. It was
just starting with the interim final rule, and there was a lot of caution that was recommended by Joshua at that time. There was a big discussion about it. At the end of the day, everybody took it. We're just moving the ball forward, and we would try to figure it out as more rules came. And it started off when they did this, and this opinion happened back then. There was all kinds of things where there was great chances for mental health because the rule was still being developed and different things, different buckets that everybody was looking at. So it's really hard to get the lens back there when you look at the rule now, because the lens back then was different than the lens is now.
I can't support this. These two funds are ARPA funds, the $10 million and the 5.6.
That was already passed.
I get it.
So,
but we just said that the second funds didn't have anything to do with ARPA funds. They clearly do, and it says 5.6 right
you're
here.
misunderstanding.
Okay, explain it to me.
We're changing, we're amending the old. So we're going to change it to not say that anymore.
Okay,
So you would want to support it because it's going to say what you want to say now. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It really doesn't. You've taken off $1.5 million.
You're looking at the old, okay?
Right.
The new, okay? And he moved it as 14.2, using county funds, including ARPA funds and reserves. And quite frankly, any county fund is any source. So 10 million of it's going to come from ARPA funds by a previous motion.
Okay.
Okay?
Which is the only
We
sure
haven't
thing.
designated any other funds. We're just saying, guaranteed, we're going to give you this money.
Okay.
We got a year to come up with the 4.2 from any source.
So it's actually clarifying it to say what you want it to say.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So right now, we haven't obligated the 15.5 from before. That
No.
whatever was passed back in
June or July or whatever.
June or July didn't pass.
No, it passed. But what we said was, if it's possible, this is how we're going to do it. We shouldn't have put anything. We should have just said, hey, we're going to do it.
And
if that makes sense.
If I remember correctly, the reason that we needed that motion is basically the LEC authority, before approving the contract for the jail, they had to be able to say, we have a funding source to be good on the contract. And they knew that the bonding was going to be a certain amount, and basically the 15.6 was what they thought was the additional funds that needed to come up with. And our motion said, we're hoping to use COVID money, basically, but irregardless of that, the county's good for that 15.6 million. And my understanding is that this motion just says, hey, now we understand that that number isn't 15.6, it's 14.2, we're still good for that money.
Yes. Okay. We haven't made any decisions on the second 10
Did we
million.
have, so it was a motion by you, second by Taylor, right, was it?
Yeah, I made the motion.
I made a second.
Sure.
It's motion by Ung, second by Taylor to approve reducing previously approved funding of 15.6 million to 14.2 million necessary towards Woodbury County LEC Authority project costs from county funds, including eligible ARPA funds.
Can we amend the motion to say including general basic reserves, which is what the motion says?
Sure. And general basic reserves.
Yeah.
Motion amended to add and general basic reserves.
Second.
So I have a motion to amend from Matthew and a second by Jeremy. Any discussion on the proposed amendment?
It's a friendly amendment, right? We don't need to.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The amendment passes 5-0. So any other discussion on the motion moving forward? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And that passes 5-0. Moving on to item 14E.
Well, thank you for the previous items. I think that adds some clarity and helps us all move forward on what is appropriate expenses. Next item is to reduce supervisor salaries to $5,000. This is an exciting opportunity for the Board of Supervisors to show servant leadership, to lead by example during a tough budget year, and to lean forward into sacrificial public service. I would move to reduce all county supervisor annual salaries to $5,000 for the FY23 budget, including the chairperson.
Any other comment, discussion, anything?
Don't we need a second first to discuss it?
Well, we would. Anybody want to?
So what happens if you don't get a second, just die?
Motion dies for lack of second. All right, well, before we go on to item 15, I think we're going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, somewhere in there. Let's go 5 minutes.
Say what? Hi.
Listen to any of what he says ever, because you're the sheriff, you're the boss. I want you to understand that.
Yep.
But I said, Joe Weber needs to have a meeting with you to talk through his final numbers, because I've seen a bunch of emails with those final numbers. But nobody has shared with you since the last time we all sat together in a group. And we said you needed roughly 20 people. We all agreed upon that in the room, but we said Joe was gonna work with you guys to come up with
One of the numbers he gave us was 30.
in one of those, I'm not disagreeing anyway. I know you're getting busy for that. We just need to talk. I just want to make sure you were aware of that.
Sure. All right. Thank you. Yep.
Fire back up here. All right, moving on, 15A, the sheriff starting on page 4, uniform patrol.
You're going to see some variances in the payroll because they're shifting people around, getting them in the right department division. They did not increase their overall numbers. The same numbers, just get them in the right category. So you see some big increase, some small increase in the payroll line item, that's what it is.
Any shift from basic to rural basic to general?
Yes, the one that went to rural basic came from courthouse security. Deputy wasn't right there, was moved over, because really, bulk of the stuff is done, not in the courthouse, is really done somewhere else. So we're just getting them in the right category.
So somebody was moved out here.
Was moved in, the uniform patrol.
Was moved in? This is a, okay, gotcha.
Nothing else.
I'll move to receive that. Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any discussion?
So what's the overall increase or decrease, or there is?
There isn't any.
There's not.
Same number of deputies, clerical staff, whatever, it's just reallocated in different departments. And that was verified through HR and our payroll.
But we also have
Just for some clarification, so this is the first full year of me being involved in the budgeting process. I was allowed to be a part of it last year, the planning process, but I didn't actually take office till January 2nd. When I started to look at the budget, there were people in places that weren't in the places that they work, which for me and anybody that's looking at it from the outside world made 0 sense. Why would you have a deputy in one place and that's not where they're at? Now, what I was told is because in the past, people had moved frequently enough that it was easier just to put them somewhere. Well, we really haven't moved anybody in the year that I've been here because it's not my, I don't know what you'd want to say, my leadership style to play musical chairs. And I'm not in no way to say, I'm not criticizing previous administrations. I don't mean that in any way. That came out sounding bad. What I mean was just that for me if anybody wants to look at the sheriff's office and what we view as priorities, the way I have always been trained is if you want to know what's important in somebody's organization, look at their budget. They can tell you whatever they want, but where their money is at will tell you what is really important to them. And so to make it easy for not just you all, but transparency for the public as well, to put all these people where they actually are in our organization. So that's why you've seen this shift, because I really pushed Jennifer to work with Dennis to get the people where they really physically are, so that you all, as you scrutinize this budget, you can see exactly where our personnel are located rather than, they're not, if that makes sense. So that's why you've seen all this movement. Really, truthfully, no one's moved in a year other than they are now, I believe, currently located in the budget where they are within our organization.
In terms of title, or what do you mean?
Well, one of the things that I got changed last year was we were calling transport courthouse security. So as I was working through the budget last year, I said, wait, we have court security. What is this courthouse security? And they kept saying, well, courthouse security is actually transport. And I said, why don't we call it transport then? And they said, well, we've always called it courthouse security. I said, well, check with Dennis and see if we can call it transport, since that's what it is. And Dennis said, well, yeah, we can change it if you want. Okay, well, let's call it what it is. So, I mean, I hope that this shift, I just heard a couple minutes ago that maybe there was some confusion about the transport numbers are way different than they were last year and that there's other things. This really hasn't changed our budget. It isn't, other than when we get into the new requests. As far as all this is concerned, these people are just now in the budget where they really are doing the work for the sheriff's office, just for clarification. Is that fair, Dennis? Okay.
So this page 4 that says 158,708 isn't an increase, or?
That's an increase because there's a deputy been moved in that category.
But there's a decrease somewhere.
Yes. You'll see in transport, it's a pretty big decrease.
Okay.
So it's just moving people where they properly should be.
Transport meaning courthouse security?
No. Courtroom and transport of prisoners. Then you've got courthouse security as the front door.
It used to be called something different, though.
Yeah,
I
used to
caught
be courthouse.
I caught the humor.
It's a little dry sometimes.
I got it.
Thanks for taking it.
I appreciate it, too. I got it. I picked up on it.
Well, any other questions on uniform patrol? All right, seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to Highway Safety Grant, page 5. This is the grant fund, so I'm just going to move to receive it.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Wright. Any discussion on it there from the sheriff?
No, it is what it is.
All right. Anyone have a question? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to 3, investigations. That's on page 6.
Again, that's the same thing.
That's
People
it.
were moved. The previous 3 deputies that had been in there, only 2 of them actually worked investigations. The other one was a new hire who is a road deputy. So what you see there now, those are the people that we have assigned as detectives. 3 of them are working, 4 of them, counting the sergeant, are working our detective bureau, and 1 of them is, works for the drug task force, which falls under our investigations.
So is this moving more people into
It
the
is.
right
It's
category?
they are right, what you see in this new budget, they are where they are currently working.
I'll move to receive that.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion on it? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to the Drug Task Force, which is on page 7. This is, was this a grant?
This is the money from the DEA task force, the HIDA task force. That we
Motor,
now have somebody assigned to. For a while, we didn't have somebody assigned there because I wasn't gonna run uniform patrol short. So there was probably, 6-8 months without anybody filling that task force position because I wasn't willing to sacrifice answering calls for service. But he's there now. We're technically currently at full staff.
Do we have a motion and second on that? Yes.
I moved it, but I don't.
Oh, so motion by Taylor, second by Raddick. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to 5, Correctional Facility, LEC, page 8 through 11.
The only thing here on the revenue side of it, because the jail is completely full, basically, there's very, very few federal prisoners, which reduced our revenue 160,000. And that might even be, 20,000 might even be high, it's full as far as I know.
This is $1 million increase here.
Okay, now this budget does include the improvement request of 515,000. That is on page 9. And there was a shift of some employees also for 244,000 are organized employees. Again, this is always get them in a proper place. Hadn't increased their numbers at all, but it's just put them in a proper place.
Is this something we want to revisit? Is there another staffing study going on? Is that fair to say?
Shane just spoke to me before about the, apparently Joe Weber, who's the criminologist with GGA. The last information I got from him through the chief deputy was they were recommending 30 new correctional officers for when we open the new facility. I basically said that that was too high. I thought the number then got pared down to 20. I still felt that that was a little higher than I was willing to come and talk to you all about. I think the number that we came to was 15 correctional officers with a sergeant and a lieutenant and a clerk, which is, we've talked previously when I came and got the warrants clerk before. There's a second person who handles warrants for us that is a correctional officer. My desire way back when I started talking to, I think, Chairman DeWitt last year, was with needing that second warrants clerk, which you gave us back in September, October, when we were going to be asking for new correctional officers, however many we felt we needed, we were going to ask for one less because I was going to reallocate that correctional officer from doing warrant clerk work back into the jail and ask you for a warrant clerk to fill that position, which is a lower paying position. So it would be a way to save some money by reallocating that position. So as far as, I guess your question, I'm not really aware other than what Shane said about Joe might have some new numbers, but I wasn't aware of that until 2 minutes ago. I mean, I think the determination for staffing, if we want to get into talking about the improvement requests, regardless of what a criminologist tells us, I mean, we know what it's going to take to run the jail, and in no way was I going to come here and ask you for 30 people, even if that's what his report said.
I found out too yesterday, because I had a meeting with the gentleman over there on financing this whole thing, that they did mention that he's coming back with a study. And I said, if you're coming back with a study, you need to get that before the board by at least February 1st. And before the sheriff too, to look at it, whatever the recommendation, I heard it could even be lower. So you can take this out, revisit it February 1st or 8th, get the report, and then visit with the sheriff, really what is the need.
Go ahead.
Yep, ask away.
This-
I'm
so-
here to answer whatever questions you've got.
Just a quick statement and then this. My worry, and I think I've expressed this to you, is that when we first started talking to the public, or when GGA started talking, it was about not increasing staff. That through design and through technology and through all of this, and so that's my worry is fast forward to now we're talking 15, 20, 30, however many.
So if I can just clarify.
Yeah.
GGA, the statements, again, this was prior to me taking office, this was prior to the election, this was prior to any of that. But having had conversations with the chief deputy, and I have Captain Harlow, who's our jail administrator, what the information GGA was giving us was that based on the new jail they had built in Saginaw, Michigan, was that they were using the same amount of correctional officers to work a jail similar to the size of what our new jail was going to be. We, meaning those of us that were in the sheriff's office, I'll throw myself in that category, it was prior to me being here, but the thought was nobody believed how that would be possible. How could you possibly double your population and not increase your size? Part of his justification was because it was going to be all on one level. Then to save $1 million in the LEC authority's budget, they decided to stack the two pods, which saved, I think, $1 million.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but
$900,000
I don't think at that time that it was exposed that we might need to have more staff either.
Well,
So we were saving money at the time, excuse me.
Yep.
We were saving money at the time and allowing for better, more practical future expansion if needed or desired. But yes, the cost would be more staff, which really wasn't investigated at that time.
Well, yeah, so, but what they kept saying was the same number of correctional officers. So the decision was made to stack the jail to save, I think it was right around $1 million, give or take.
I think it was more than that, but
Okay,
yeah.
somewhere in that neighborhood. Then at some point, we send several of our staff members to Saginaw to visit their jail. And you did not go, is that right? Oh, you did go. When they got there, what they realized and found out was that Saginaw they do staff their jail, which is similar to the size of the new facility we're going to have, with the minimum of 10 correctional officers, which is our minimum staffing. However, what GGA either didn't know to ask or Saginaw failed to mention is they utilize between 4 and 6 civilian non-correctional officers to do the work that our correctional officers do, meaning master control, secondary control, booking, those types of things. So when you look at the numbers equally, they operate with a minimum of 15.
It's a big, in my estimation, and I'm not saying on your part, it's a big screw up because we went to the public, I feel like, and said, no, and I didn't hear people saying, we absolutely can't operate the way Larry Goldberg is saying right now.
Well, there were,
there
were people on our side, though, that said until we can prove that he's not, that information is inaccurate, we're going to go with what he's telling us. And then stacking the jail impacted that because now you're talking about the need to go from one level to another if there's an emergency, which So when you're talking about having rovers, which and I don't want to, until I took over as sheriff, I had never really been back in the inner workings of the jail, okay? And I'd be happy to give any of you a tour of our current facility that we have. But there are people who are assigned to booking. There are people who are assigned into master control, secondary control. Master control lets everybody in, is the easiest way for me to describe it. They let you in. They control the outer perimeter of the jail, okay, and let you in and out and whatever else. Secondary monitors the sections. With the 2 levels, we will end up having 2 secondary controllers, and the master control, which we now have 1, we anticipate we're going to need 2, because we're going to go from 60, 70 cameras to 200. One person can't monitor 200 cameras. It's not power.
But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're saving $1 million plus by stacking the pods.
Yes. No, absolutely.
And yes, it may cost us more on staffing, but I'm not losing sight of the fact that we're saving a lot of money by stacking.
Absolutely.
So is there an offset? Yeah.
Yes.
Is there
And
still a savings? Yeah.
Even if the pods were side by side, they would probably be far enough away that we still would have had to have an additional staffing. I don't know that stacking them adds much more than if they were side by side because of the distance that they would be from each other. And it's if there's an emergency. And unfortunately, we never know when there's going to be an emergency. But if we don't properly staff the jail and somebody's hurt or hurts themselves or hurts somebody else, that opens all of you or the county up to liability because we didn't properly supervise the inmates. That's a problem.
How many is this staffed for? How many inmates with
The new facility would be 503, 507.
So this is in order to be able to staff full capacity of 507, essentially. Is that correct?
We believe that with the new improvements, the 15 correctional officers, that clerk, so that it'll actually make it 16, okay? And I don't know if you have that improvement request in front of you.
We should have 20 in there, don't we? 21?
It's 15
Was it
correctional
15 or was it
officers,
21?
clerk,
It was improvements, 20 people.
We had 20 people plus a lieutenant. We had 21.
It's right here in the description on page 9. You can see how it's broke down. He's got it broke down. There are 15 correctional officers, new jail sergeant.
Sergeant, that's 16. The jail lieutenant, that's 17.
They actually got 19, but see, he shifted one on a warrant person to save, so he ordered 20, because the warrant person was already there. So there's really 19 that he's listed here.
The new deputy position should be under the courthouse security
That's under the
improvement
courthouse,
request.
that's a separate issue.
So you've got 15, 16, 17, I count 18.
Now, if you go back to the improvement section, he's got listed there three different options.
That's at the back here.
Now, go back to this.
Improvement request.
515, when I added up, came to 515, it's close to 508. But it shows there how many officers there. He's got 15 correctional officers, and
That new deputy should not be there, that's an error. The new deputy should be, where it says June 1st, create and hire new deputy, that should be under the courthouse security.
that's a different improvement there.
That should be a different request, that's an error.
So then you're closer to 508.
It's not in option B or C. That was an error on my part. And the difference with the 3 options that you see there was staggering the hiring. We don't believe we could hire 16 correctional officers tomorrow if we wanted to. We couldn't. We're having difficulty finding 4 or 5 people to apply for one position. So staggering the officers, we also wouldn't be able to train 16 people at once because we don't have the field training officers available to do it. So by staggering the hiring also limits the expenditure for the year because instead of having somebody, instead of hiring all 16, we hire 3, then we wait a couple months, we hire 3 more, and each option just delays when we start the hiring process of the staggered hire, if that makes sense.
My worry also is having 507 prisoners, inmates. I mean, that's,
Without enough staff, you're saying?
no, I'm worried that we're going to have staff for 507 with 230.
Oh.
And that,
I mean,
you're right, you're 100% right. The risk is that you have staff, but you don't have the revenue. You don't have the inmates. The issue is, if you have a need to have the inmates, but we don't have the staff, we're not going to accept them.
Right? And before, it was when GGA, and I'm not faulting anybody, but I didn't hear other people saying he's absolutely wrong and don't trust what he's saying.
Well, we didn't have the information to be able to say that.
Yeah.
We trusted that what the information he was getting from Saginaw was accurate. It's just that either Saginaw didn't share, or they just didn't know to ask, are you utilizing other staff to adequately supervise the size of the jail that you have? And we didn't know that until we visited. And as soon as they visited, we returned, and we immediately opened a line of communication.
And my job isn't to throw stones here. Mine is to
I
just,
understand.
my worry is before, when it was, okay, we can keep relatively the same number of staff. Well, if we have 230 and, a space for 500, that's not a big deal.
No,
Now,
except
if we have
without
the
the
opposite.
revenue, you don't have, there's no mechanism to pay off the bonds. So it's my understanding that in order to pay off the bonds, the goal was to have X number of federal inmates to pay off the bonds because of the revenue. So in order to accept the number of inmates that are going to be needed, the federal inmates that are going to be needed, we're going to need more staff.
Because the federal will look at that to see if we have adequate staffing before they entertain putting them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Because if we can't properly supervise them, they won't put their inmates here. So it is unfortunately a catch-22. At the end of the day, the sheriff determines who comes in my jail. Not you or the authority or nobody. We decide who comes in the jail, period. So if we don't have the staff to safely have the inmates in there for their safety and for our staff's safety, there won't be one federal inmate in there, just like there is right now. And you all will have to determine how you're going to pay for the jail, not us. That's not my job. That's your job.
Question.
Go ahead.
I don't know how to say
I think
any clearer than that.
Right.
That's just what it is. That's not my job. My job is to have a safe jail, safe staff. It's your job to handle the money. I wasn't here when those decisions were made, but I'm here now. So that's your job, not mine.
Trying to find a silver lining here, if there is one. Let's say we stagger some of these hires. Maybe they're all filled, maybe not, just given the environment we're in right now.
And I'm totally open to trying to figure out what we think that can be. And I'm saying, so what Dennis told me was give us the worst case scenario. So that's what I did. To me, these options A, B, and C are the worst case scenario, which would be we need 16 new correctional officers. Well, it's 15 new correctional officers, the clerk, so that I can move the other one. That gives us 4 per team. And I don't know, I don't know how detailed you want me to get. We have 4 teams that work 12-hour shifts. If we increase it by 4, that should give us enough staffing to be able to have whatever it is, 107, 108 federal inmates they believe they want, right? So, because we think our numbers for the county will probably go up to about 300. Just so you know, today, we were at 243 this morning, 6 a.m.
Say that again?
243 in our jail. We're supposed to have 234, but we're at 243. If you figure if we assume that number's gonna go for the county about 300, and that may take a few months to get there, plus the 100 and.
Matter of months?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, it could be as quick as a week, because right now, they're doing everything they can. I mean, we have a jail sergeant that works every day trying to get people out. So this morning, he was scrambling to get inmates out through other alternative sources. And the justice system has worked very well with us on keeping those numbers down. The problem is, and why you see the loss in revenue, we can't accept federal inmates right now because we're at full capacity with our own. And through the previous administration, and I agree with, it never made sense that we would pay to house a Woodbury County inmate in another county just so we could accept a federal inmate. It's made no sense.
It's a wash, right, Dennis?
Wash.
Wash, right, Dennis?
It would probably be a loss because you add in the transports. We would have to go, every time somebody had a hearing in Woodbury County, we'd have to go to Plymouth or Osceola or Polk or wherever to pick them up and bring them back.
So for a formality to move forward, can you say who you got with you? And we also have Tony Wingert on the phone.
Oh, okay. Yep. Captain Harlow, who's the jail administrator. Jennifer Beeson is our administrative assistant. And I have Captain Peterson in the back, who's uniform captain. And then Chief Deputy Wingert, no promotion. Chief Deputy Wingert is apparently on the phone.
So,
I'm hurt. I don't think I should lose my spot just because I'm hurt.
And I don't mean to, I don't mean to come across, I realize sometimes I'd rather just say it like it is. And so I don't mean that to be disrespectful in any way. I'm just saying that, and I think when I say that it's my responsibility to make the jail safe, that is for you all. That is for the county because, look, our jail right now, bad things are happening every day.
and
We're having correctional officers getting assaulted literally on a weekly basis.
I don't think any of us are going to argue with you. You were elected by voters to do your job, and we expect you to do it to the best of your ability, and likewise us. So,
Yep.
and I think
I just don't want to come across as being adversarial with all of you, because I'm in no way am I trying to do
like
that.
that's
I'm
the
open to
nicest
being
it's come
creative. Say that again?
I feel like that's the nicest it's come across, so.
I'm open to creating a way, because I think Rocky and I had talked one time in my office, is there a way that instead of
Just one?
16, well, yeah, instead of 16, can we try to get 8 maybe hired? So that there's 8 hired and trained when we open, so that if there is 100 federal inmates, we can take them. And then if there ends up being 150, we then look at hiring 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more over time. Because you're correct, Jeremy. If it ends up that we hire people and for whatever reason, there aren't any inmates, then it's going to be my unfortunate job to lay correctional officers off. New correctional officers who have been hired to staff a new facility, that there isn't the revenue.
In the spirit of moving things along, I would move to receive this budget item.
Well, if we move with option C, we would have a reduction, right?
Say that again.
If we move forward with option C, you would have a reduction, would you not?
Option C is,
Staggering the.
yeah, it's what, not quite $200,000 cheaper for next fiscal budget.
So that would be a reduction of 200,000 if we did proceed forward with option C. Go ahead.
You gotta remember, to generate money, we're gonna spend money. What we're gonna spend is insignificant to what we're gonna get. If we generate $5 million, it costs us $500,000 new staff, that's a pretty big gain. If we don't have the staff, we don't get the revenue. Then we didn't fulfill what we said to the taxpayer.
Right.
That's potential.
Well,
But what are we paying every year to pay off this note? I mean, at the end of the day, we kept saying, this is taxpayer neutral, this isn't gonna increase taxes.
Get it taxpayer neutral, we gotta generate $5 million. Which if I took 85 times 365 times 185, that comes a little over 5 million. Takes a lot of prisoners, but 85 may be obsolete too. It could be a lot higher because you're dealing with a whole different expense factors, things like that.
And there have been things that have happened behind the scenes that, we had no control over. We thought we were working in good faith with the U.S. Marshals to look at maybe a CAPS funding program. Met with them in May. I found out sometime in September that they had simultaneously been working with Dakota County, and that didn't come to fruition for us. But we also have been communicating with ICE and trying to keep those lines of communication open to do whatever we can to have that revenue option, if it's available, that we want to make it available. I mean, we want to do everything we can to make this tax neutral.
I just think once it's open, they're going to come. I think ICE is desperate for beds, and I think the marshals will also have a need still, regardless of what, that won't be done anyway.
And if we generate more than 5 million, then after we get that, debt neutral, then that extra money can pay for these additional staff.
And, I think we can move forward and receive, as I'd prefer option C, and then maybe pledge reserves to cover that gap, because like you say, as people hire, I think it might actually be a difficult task to get all
It is,
these
and
positions
something
hired.
else that's not in the budget is, I think, if I remember right, and Tony, you might correct me, I think we've been averaging about 7 new hires a year. And what's it take, Tony? Is it 6 weeks, 8 weeks from the time they leave until the time we actually get somebody hired where there's nobody being paid that budgeted amount? So take 6 weeks.
6 weeks that nobody, 6 weeks nobody's being paid. It takes over 10 weeks to actually start counting on our schedule as a
6 weeks,
worker.
no one's paid times 7 times a year on average. That's, I'll let you do the math.
Sure.
So what are we talking about on an annual expenditure? It's not 334,000.
Just for this fiscal year.
Right, but my concern
After that,
is,
it's
what are
500.
you on?
Well, if you prorate it out on option A to a full year, I just took the months they had there, it'd be about $1.3 million.
Right, so my problem is, we're talking about things like, and I know that, I completely understand the position you're in and the hat you're wearing, so please understand that. We're looking at this and we're like, 334, that's not that big a deal. You're on the hook for 1.3 million every single year, and you have this huge if predicated on, well, we'll have 507, we'll just do the math, when we don't have a single signed contract to have any. I mean, it's an enormous risk when the public was told this taxpayer neutral. I just think, and it's not your fault.
No.
And I'm not throwing stones at anybody, but I just.
You are absolutely correct. This is a risk. So, and the chief will tell you, once I took over, I thought, my opinion was, banking on federal inmates was a huge risk because of the potential outcome of the election in November. And it was a risk, because if the election would have went the other way, we would have been looking at building phase 2 right now, because we would be talking about needing 900 beds between ICE and other people. But that, because elections have consequences, that need dramatically decreased. So I'm just making sure that I'm very transparent with you all, that you are correct. It is a risk. Now, we're being told that ICE doesn't think they're gonna have a problem filling beds. They're looking for, I think the latest number, and Tony, you correct me, 300? Not that they would use 300 here, but there's at least 300 that they're looking for in the Minneapolis, which is
Under their region, the region we're in.
Region. Now, you're talking about signed contracts. I was told throughout the whole process working with the marshals, they would not sign a contract with us. But they signed one across the river.
Well, that, I was told the same thing in all the lead up to, trying to build the jail, because if we had had a signed contract, We never would add a referendum. We would have been, it'd be built, it'd already be done. So the challenge is, you know, of course, seeing that in the news and not, you know, kind of being insulted by it. You know, I do know that as we went through, you know, Sheriff Drew was the sheriff at the time, and he was always, you know, I'm not willing to answer that, you know, and he would warn that we would probably need staff. I relied on our consultant. I did call our consultant, kind of just let him know I was a little disappointed to see a staffing increase recommendation. And, you know, obviously a design change changes things. But he had also mentioned just in general, you know, labor rules from one place to another are always different. The sheer amount of guys you might have that have a, you know, National Guard or military background that they serve in is different from a community to a community. And if somebody's gone, you have to cover that person. And that I'm not saying we're not going to hire those guys. I think that's the absolutely right fit for our system. But all those factors do play into staffing as well when you guys are doing this. So I think it's going to end up a phased-in approach anyway, because you could put an ad out there that you're hiring 15 people or 14 people, and you're probably not going to get 15 applicants month one.
And that's why we're staggering them.
Yep, so.
The other thing is it gives us the opportunity to get them trained. So option C, though, if I remember right, they would be hired and ready to go.
What's
the
that?
last 3 would not be ready to go day one, but there would still be 12 that would be ready to go day one.
I move to receive with option 3.
So that would be a what reduction? 334, 695, 46, and the way it's presented is 515, 198, Dennis?
Well, it's 508, because there's one number in there at 67, so I'd go with this 508, 445.
You said option C, option Charles?
Yeah.
And this is 2023, correct? January 1st and February 1st? Not 2022.
Yeah, it says 22. Does that mean
We're not doing a budget amendment right now, right?
Well, this is 23.
Did I put the wrong?
For January.
I did. I put the wrong, the first
Yeah,
two
that's-
dates are the wrong year. It should be 2023.
Okay, yeah.
It's a type error.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't hiring somebody right now.
Past January.
So that's a reduction of 173, 750.
Okay.
All right? And I'll second the motion.
I have a question. Given the short-term risk that we are committed to undertaking and getting these, you know, federal prisoners, I would think that being appropriately or overstaffed would help your overtime numbers. Is there anything you can say to that? As far as vacation and leaves and all that that currently exists, how much of that would go away?
Yep. Well, go ahead.
Sheriff, before you comment, we're not overstaffed, even when we add these people staff now as we speak, and I'll let Sheriff talk too about the overtime.
Yeah. So the overtime, if you, I don't know what the current overtime budget the last completed budget year, it was 300 and some thousand, 329,000. So with the hiring of this additional staff, while we're still in this building, because just so you know, that means that we will be training them while we're still here. So for the last several months, it may reduce overtime expenditures. I don't know how much it will reduce overtime expenditures day one in the new facility. That will be dependent on how many inmates there are. If it takes us 3 or 4 months to trickle in more inmates, then it would continue to have that effect where it would probably lower overtime, because we wouldn't have to increase our minimum staffing if there aren't as many inmates, if that makes
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yep.
I think
Yes.
that shouldn't be lost in this discussion is that is going to be an ongoing savings
Yes.
until we reach full capacity.
And our federal prisoners dropping off completely. I mean, we're at 50,000 almost right now, and we're going down to 20,000. We're halfway through the year.
How many federal prisoners have we had in the last 3 months?
Probably 5, but as soon as they're ready, as soon as they're done with state, they ship them over to Cook County.
Okay.
And again, you know, to be fair to the marshals, part of their frustration, and I understand it, is that we are a large enough jail, meaning large enough of our own population, meaning our Woodbury County cases, that we don't have the luxury of catering to their needs every time they need bed space. And so what happens is when we get to full capacity of our own inmates, you know, Captain Harlow gets to be the bad guy and call Brandon at the marshals and say, hey, you gotta get these guys out of here. We're over capacity. And that creates a hardship for them. And so, you know, in fairness to them, I get it. It's a frustration for them. I will say, though, when we met with them in May, I gave them every assurance that when this new facility's open, we would have at least 100 to 150 beds to offer them, and that would no longer be a problem. And they were made aware of that in May.
Well, and I think that just makes sense. I mean, it's like general, like driving by a drive-through and the cars are wrapped around. If every time they're all wrapped around, you're never going to stop at that place. But you're going to go where you get service. So they're looking for a place to get service, and we'll have it at the new facility.
Now, the good news is, I will say, because I've monitored the conversations they've had in Dakota County, they're saying that the Nebraska office out of Omaha houses, I think, double what the Sioux City office houses. So there's potential that we will get marshal inmates, even when that one is completed, which I'm not sure that one will be done before ours is open.
Isn't ICE being discontinued in Omaha too, because they're running out of room, they're closing their ICE facility down?
Well, Douglas County, I believe, pulled out of their IGA with ICE.
Well, they gotta look for them.
Just because I'm curious, that some in, some out, is that a daily basis thing? You got people going in and out every single day? In the jail? Mm-hmm. You got local people moving out, there are people going in, like on a daily basis? You
Oh,
get
yeah.
a certain number leaving?
Yeah, sometimes some days we might have 19 releases. Some days it might be 5, some days we might have 20 in and only 5 out. Well, then our numbers go up 15. Some days we have 5 in and 20 out, and our numbers go down 15.
So you're flexible, you can meet those needs, you know, if you have, 25 locals are
Well,
moving out, you can vary.
we can, but the problem is the marshal.
Federal?
We can, Justin, the problem with let's say the marshals or ICE, for example, they don't want to have an inmate, a federal inmate in our jail for 3 days, and then we call them and tell them they have to move them. They want assurance that if they're gonna put them here, they're gonna be here until their trial, which might be 3 months. And that becomes a problem. Now, with the new facility, we'll have the bed space to say, guys, we have 150 beds available, and they're there.
Right, I get you, I just wondered how, how flexible that process.
It's fluid. Currently, every day.
Right.
It can fluctuate between 5 and 25.
The other question I have for you is, do you have everything you need to move as quickly as possible through what you need to get done to put us in a better position? Do you have all the resources you need to work as hard as you can to get the contracts that we need to make the map work out?
With the marshals, or with the feds in general?
You have everything that you need as a sheriff?
No, I think right now, I mean, I would say that we're short-staffed in our jail right now. But budgets are tight, I get it, I understand. So, and that's why overtime is costing us over $300,000 a year. I don't know how many it would take to hire to offset that, but.
And not necessarily, because you made it very clear your job is to take care of your people, the inmates that are coming in. I'm speaking to now the money, okay? You have everything you need to move quickly.
Well, this will certainly get us moving in the right direction, for sure.
And just to see if there's any other questions on the correctional facility, less the 173,750. Any other discussion? Questions?
So with this option, the total annual cost is what after
Well, we're reducing 173,750, so,
1.3 million.
1.3?
oh, annual, yeah.
Right.
after that, yes.
And
We should
that's,
have
that's
revenue
my
at that
heartburn
point.
over it, so however y'all.
Well, honestly, if the revenue's not there, we're not gonna keep that many people. All right?
No, and I know that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm on record saying that I understand that I will get to be the bad guy, and if it ends up that the revenue isn't there, then I'll have to be the bad guy to unfortunately lay people off if that becomes necessary. And I understand that.
Yeah.
How many open positions do you have now, if you do?
2 or 3? 2.
2? And are they not filled because of applicants?
They're not filled. We're waiting for applicants and waiting to do the interviews.
Okay. And if
Oh, well, we're going to be down 3 apparently.
if you can say or want to say, what's the highest inmate population been?
Well, this morning was 243. I mean, it's been up in the mid 240s.
Okay.
Multiple days over the last several months. I mean, there was, I can't remember if it was September, October. I think it was pretty close, 264. So it's 30 over. Now, it's temporary because, like I said, we do everything we can and work with the county attorney's office and the courts to get them out as quickly as we can.
Send anybody elsewhere?
No.
All right, well, if there's nothing else in correctional facility, I'd like to ask for a vote, so.
Actual dollar amount's 184.13. So you gotta use the 515 less option C, but 515 included a person there shouldn't have been in there. So it's really 184.13 reduction.
You got her, Michelle? Thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? So 4 to 1. All right, moving on to item 6, administration, page 12 through 15.
I'd move to receive.
Second.
This one, the
Again,
two,
all these wages there for elected deputies is what the comp board set.
and that's all
So
in
they're
here.
in there.
Okay.
Those reflects, they're in there. I had to put them in because the board hasn't done anything with them until the public hearing.
But this doesn't take affirmative action on that currently, correct?
You're just receiving it.
Right.
It'll change if you do change the comp board. It'll change. It can't go up anymore, but it can go down.
So it was Taylor and DeWitt. Motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to 7, crime prevention on page 16. I'll just move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to 8, civil division, which is on page 17. This one was a jump of 108, which moved somebody in there.
No, it looks like we just changed the names is all. What's the increase from?
Like one organized employee, maybe, 80,000?
Okay, we moved a supervisor out and a deputy in.
Does that make up an $108,000 increase by doing that?
Covers quite a bit of it. Because you gotta include FICA and
But 108,000 between shifting one in and one out?
It's like 80,000.
That's a huge, what's the person making,
We
200?
must have moved a whole new person.
Sheriff, is that where we moved the lieutenant that was in charge of courthouse security? Is that where we moved him into?
No, I don't think so.
We moved him out?
No, his is in the next one, page 18. Wait, are we on 17?
We're law
Page
enforcement,
17.
sheriff, civil division.
went to uniform patrol out on the rural basin.
Okay, so 17, there's an $80,000 increase in organized employees. I would I'm
Oh,
assuming.
we moved a deputy in. Deputy Rising moved in.
So we moved a deputy in.
Bottom line, it's not a new hire. Is that a fair statement?
Not a new hire, no.
It is not. They still have the same number of staffing their board authorized them to throughout its whole system. It's just moving these people around where they should be.
I'll move to receive. Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion?
Thanks, chief.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to courthouse security, which this one has the improvement request on page 18.
Yes. So that is, that's the request for a deputy, which my recommendation or the request is to hire a deputy December 1st of 2022 so that we can get that deputy hired to the academy and back so that June, when we move into a new facility, we have a sworn person assigned to working the courthouse and Trosper Hoyt. Currently, everybody that works in this building has the luxury of, if there's an emergency, they call across the street and 4 or 5 of us come running over and we have full arrest authority. When we move, we're not gonna be across the street. So you're gonna call 911 like everybody else, and you'll wait until somebody responds.
Would you be looking at reducing the staff that's,
No, because what,
because I know we discussed about
yeah.
you moving an office or something over here just to have a.
Yeah, so my thought was that if we will keep the part-time staff that we have, we'll keep it exactly the way it is. We will just add a deputy that will work out of the courthouse. My thought is we will probably rotate, unless we find a deputy who wants to work the courthouse for, I don't know, whatever, the rest of their career or whatever. Rocky's crinkling his nose, shaking his head. That was kind of my thought. I don't know if we'll have somebody that's going to want to work here a long time, so we'll rotate probably the civil division deputy. They'll take turns working here for a certain amount of time. What that would allow the courthouse and Trosper Hoyt to have is a sworn deputy that's here. So when the guy with the warrant walks into the clerk's office to check on his paperwork, there's a sworn deputy available to make that arrest. The other reason that I'm not decreasing the part-time staff is we can't only have 2 people at the front if there's an emergency at Trosper Hoyt at Juvenile Court Services or the Juvenile Court, because you can't leave one person staffing the metal detector. Because if somebody were to want to attack, all you got to do is create a diversion over there, send one of the courthouse security up there. That leaves one here to keep the whole courthouse safe. And that's why I'm not decreasing part-time staff, adding that 3rd deputy so that there would always be 2 at the metal detector, keeping the courthouse safe. And again, that's just because of moving the location of the sheriff's office.
We don't have the luxury of having the LEC right across the street.
That's right.
We still have the police department across the street, though. I mean, could we not have the police department respond?
Sure. Yeah.
Because how many arrests do you make in the courthouse a year?
They're quite often. We're called over here quite often.
Really?
And, oh yeah. And I mean, you can ask Rocky. I would say that would be like City Hall saying, well, we got the LEC over there. This building is our responsibility.
Sure.
That's the way I look at it.
Sure.
Now, granted, you can just call 911 and hope that they get here as quick as they can. But if they're working a stabbing like they were this morning or something else, you're going to wait like everybody else.
I'd say that the part-time hours that I'm here, I'm seeing about 6 arrests, 6 cuffs a year. So I know there's more than that. Plus I've had, I don't know, I'll probably have 2 a year that'll walk in and say, I'm turning myself in. Where do I go? So I walk them across to the
And it's not just
jail.
arrests, it's people that become angry because they don't want to wear a mask. I happened to come over to do business, I think it was last week or the week before, and a guy's all upset and angry in the clerk's office. You know, we come over, we handle that.
So this is going to take a budget amendment, correct, Dennis? I mean, this is to hire somebody, it says
To
this
hire somebody next fiscal year.
December of '22.
Yeah, which would be
22,
next
23
fiscal year.
budget. It's for 7 months, then in 23, 24 will be full year. So it won't affect this current year budget at all.
Not the one we're in currently, no.
It'll be next
It's
budget.
for the budget year we're working on.
So that's
Got it.
right there, the 47.
Gotcha.
And and the reason I have that December 1st is because it's going to take a while to get them through the process of the hiring. That takes several weeks. And then the academy's 16 weeks, and then they have an FTO program of at least another 10 weeks.
I move to receive.
I guess personally, I'd like to see if we could work to maybe get, one of the buttons they have over in City Hall that goes to the police station as well. If we're only doing,
I hear on the radio that they have to call in a police officer from the field to bring him in and file a report or do anything in the lobby of the PD.
Yeah, I mean, again, you guys have to make that decision. I haven't taken the time to reach out to the other people who work in this building. I would just say that from a security standpoint, you having only one person there is a security risk. You need 2 people there. And right now, if there's an emergency, when that call is made across the street or the button's pushed or one of these guys get on the radio, we all come.
Sure.
You're gonna lose that, and you will just call 911 or the non-emergency number and hope that they get here as quickly as they can. By having a deputy assigned here, you'll have that immediate response, always either here or at Trosperhoy.
you could still run a deputy from the new location over to here.
It'll be over by the time they get here.
I look at perspective of the majority of my life, there was 0 security at the courthouse when I came in, and I just walked in and went and did whatever I needed to do. And,
Those days are gone, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, you guys have to make that tough decision. I'm glad I'm not sitting in your shoes. In this particular case, I'm just telling you from a security standpoint, this is the best thing to keep the courthouse and Trosperhoy safe once we move to a new location.
I made a motion.
To increase your hours to 80 hours, Rocky?
I'll move to receive less the 47,276.
Oh, you've got a motion on the,
Well, there's no second.
Nobody seconded?
No.
I'll second.
Okay. So I have a
which one
motion.
are you seconding?
Rockies.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second on that. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, I'll say nay. All right, so passes 4-1. Moving on to courtroom security and transport, page 21.
This is where you see a lot of shifting to other departments. So all the positives.
Oh, 19 through 20, sorry, I skipped.
This is where you're going to see the major decrease.
I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion?
So this is page 21?
No, that was 19 through 20.
Okay.
Sorry. That's where all the reductions from moving people out are.
It's almost 400,000 reduction.
All right, any questions there? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to Sheriff's Commissary, which that one is on page 21.
And then that's no tax, it's just revenue they get. We give the ability to the sheriff to spend it through putting in whatever his balance is. So that's why the 10,000 there just spends up, gives him the authority to go ahead and spend it.
I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, I'll give that one to Ung. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to item 12, prisoner room and board.
Okay, we don't have anything in there, but I look at the fund balance and plug something in there, but it's non-tax. So it could be 50,000, could be 100, but still that's his discretion how he spends it.
Move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. What'd you have there, Michelle?
This depends on the different budget, the Fund 9 spends on machinery and equipment.
That's the one we're gonna increase. I just have to look at the fund balance to put a number. Should have been in there, but it doesn't affect taxes.
There's a $400,000 budget on that.
Okay, then I did put it in. It doesn't reflect it here. It is in there, 400,000. That's what his balance is. And again, that's his discretion how that money's spent. There's certain stipulations,
There's certain things we can or can't spend that money on.
but it doesn't affect taxes.
I'll move on to 13, uniform patrol, which is on page 23.
This is where we added Lieutenant Armstrong here. We just moved, I shouldn't say add, we
Shifted.
We shifted him.
I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to forfeiture, which is on page, it's item 14, page 24.
Same scenario, it just budget his balance.
Move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on, passes 5-0. Moving on to 15, dare donations. I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you, Sheriff and staff.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Shifting of the chairs to the county's attorney's office here, 15B. Administration is going to be on pages 2 through 3.
BJ's trying to get in your good graces, Keith. He's wearing a sweater just like you.
Hey, hey, great minds.
No, we appreciate what you guys have to go through. We all know what we're here for. Let's just jump into it. We're kind of pushing the hour now.
What does miscellaneous take care of, BJ? Is that, am I on the right? Oh, I might be.
We're on page 2 and 3 there.
Okay,
I would say it
Never
probably
mind,
takes
sorry.
care of everything else.
okay.
Looks like everything's pretty much the same. I'll go ahead and move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? 1,600 to maintenance contracts. That was on the IT side, right? Yep. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to Edward Byrne Grant, which is item 2. It's on page 4. I'll move to receive it.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to County Attorney Collections. That is on page 5. This jumps up a little here, right?
On this one, Keith, I talked to Luan. Originally, we didn't have any revenue in there. I put in 229,610. I talked to her. We can raise that 229,610 to 350,000 for an increase of 120,390.
So
I'd move it.
to receive with 120, 190 less?
Additional revenues, yes.
Okay. I'll second that. So motion by Taylor, second by Raddick. Did you get that number there, Michelle?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 4, HIDTA grant, HIDTA grant.
And we'll actually throw a bone out there to the county. We reduced this by 1 position. These are fully paid positions through the feds or the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're willing to actually reduce this number by this one. They don't have any prospects in the hole right now, but as long as the county will say, yes, we will continue to fund this, as long as the feds will say, or the U.S. Attorney's Office will say, they will make it 100% if they hire someone, we're willing to move those numbers off.
Okay, all right.
Well, I'd leave them in there because even reversible, that way we don't have to amend the budget if they do come in.
Well, originally we had 2 positions in that.
Right.
And we did take off 1.
Okay.
We want to leave this number in there though.
We were gonna leave it up to you guys.
I'd leave it in there because it's a wash anyway. They budget 90, we budget 90 revenue.
I move to receive as recommended by Dennis Butler.
No, you don't have to do that.
All right, 90 in, 90 out. Received, I'll second that. Motion by Taylor, or DeWitt, second by Raddick. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes 5-0. Moving on to juvenile division, which is page 7.
I'll move to receive that.
Second.
Oh, yeah, good. Okay, so that was Taylor with the motion, DeWitt with the second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 6, jury and wellness fees, which is page 8.
You say wellness fees?
I did say wellness fees. Sorry. Well, we want to make sure the jury is well.
Move to receive.
That's what happens when you have late meetings.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
So we got a motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. We had a little jump on the witness fees.
Unfortunately, we're having to hire more experts. We did a few this year, and they're projected to go up next year, so it's not like it's a fictitious number.
Yeah, this happens when we have to hire forensic psychiatrists or forensic psychologists. We can't predict when they're going to have a mental illness defense. It's just something that's difficult for us to anticipate.
All right, well, we got the motion and the second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to county attorney forfeiture, item 7, which is on page 9.
No tax. Again, we budget the balance in the fund. They may get more money, but this is what they have in the balance. So
Move it.
Second. Motion by Taylor, second by Raddick. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Moving on to item 8, county fine collections, which is, I'll move it.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Passes 5-0.
We make it too easy on you guys.
You did. That was great.
Can we go before the show next time?
Yes.
No, you're going to get it this easy, you're going to suffer a little bit on the front.
That was a long time.
Yeah, sorry. So, building services.
his coat's still there, so he's around.
I know he's short, but he's not that small. Sorry, Caitlin, no short jokes. So building services, courthouse is on page 2 through 5.
Seeing that it's a $10,000 total increase out of 696, I'll move it.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to LEC, which is on pages 6 through 9.
Kenny, they're cutting the heck out of your budget. You better get back in. By the time he gets here, he'll be done with them anyway.
So So this is a $93,000 increase, so I do
This,
want to,
this is the bigger building though.
right, but 93,000 more than we've spent in the past.
Who knows where utilities is going?
Natural gas is the biggest increase. I see if we're gonna power a bigger building, it's 40 grand increase there. Electricity's not as big of an increase, so.
We must be ready, huh?
Oh yeah, we already passed your item 1, so we're on LEC already.
LEC. Looking at natural gas.
Natural gas does it all for my entire budget, all buildings. This year on my total budget, the total increase is $152,000, or 6.5%. My entire budget is based on the Consumer Price Index, which has increased 7% over the last 12 months, and the historical and Henry Hub natural gas prices. 2020 average increase in natural gas is 12.9%. In 21, the average increase was 61.86%. And so far, this year in 2022, the increase is 8.9%. So my budget was based on a year, this current year's 22 budget at a flat rate. Basically, all the increases came in natural gas and materials and supplies for all buildings.
I'm gonna move to receive it.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. I think when I look at everything in there, it makes sense. I don't know if anyone's got a question for him.
You said you beat the Consumer Price Index, right? You were at 6 point what? 6.5. And what was the CPI?
7.
CPI 7. So you got into that?
So we've got water and sewer going up to 103,000?
Water and sewer have been increasingly going up the last several years in Sioux City.
This is
Supposed to
also
be
on the
the
bigger
same-
building.
So are we budgeting for the new law enforcement center with it?
That would not be
That
half
is
a
not
year.
part of this budget.
Oh,
Water and sewer are supposed to stay the same for this next year.
I think water and sewer, without looking, I think I was showing like a 3% increase or something like that.
This is 38%. I'm just worried, we go from 75 to 104,000.
What building are you looking at?
Thought we were on the.
we're on LEC.
The LEC?
Sure this isn't for the new? This half a year on the new.
No, this is not, this does not include any of the new LEC, Dennis.
I'd like to go to, I'd like to go to 75,000. I mean, if rates are the same and we've spent that historically, I don't see a need to increase it by 38%. So I would move to receive it $25,000 less.
Well, I'd have to rescind, I'll rescind my motion. So we have a motion by Taylor, second by Wright. That seem fair? Seem right? Don't know.
To reduce it?
Reduced by 25,000 on water? Yeah. Water and sewers on page 7.
Yep, I got it, Keith. Seems fair.
Okay. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 3, Trosper White Building, which is 10 through 13.
Trosperhoit's from current year to year 23 is a $31,555 increase. It's 6.2%. At least half of that is natural gas.
What school of instruction for them? I notice that's, and I know COVID's tamped that down quite a bit, but is that for people who are working in?
What page is that on, Jeremy?
Maybe I'm ahead of myself.
10 through 13 might be 10.
Okay, sorry, I'm ahead of myself.
You see the line item on page 10, is that correct?
No. he's ahead of
I'm on
himself.
page 50, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
My fault.
So it's like a different insurance and natural gas, maintenance contracts. I'll move to receive.
Second.
Okay, motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 4, building services on 14 through 17. Is this your school of instruction?
Yeah, and is that for your staff to get, for School of Instruction?
School of Instruction is like to send them to
Boiler schools?
classes, yeah.
And that's fairly low because in-person stuff maybe not happening? I mean, it's like 135 last year.
Yeah, we don't have a big turnover, and it's not a great expense.
Okay, but you want to have it there in case. Okay, fair enough.
Move to receive.
Second. Motion by DeWitt, second by Raddick. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 5, Anthony Courthouse, which is on page 18.
Do you need 2,500 or just in case something comes up?
That's in case something comes up. And something usually does, but 2,500 is not much to try to cover a building, no matter what it is, so.
Well, it was freezing rain the other day there, so they had to close early, and they had to buy a piece of paper to put on the door that said closed early. So that's probably part of that 2,500.
And the trustees there have $80,000 in the bank.
I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to 6, Prairie Hills Facilities, 19 through 20. I did see in that final review and clarification of the COVID recovery funds that demolition of structures for community safety is allowed.
Well, that could be part of your 5 million you gotta come up and spend. Huh? 10. No.
Second 10.
Potentially, it's possible if you find 4 million somewhere else.
But this is for the new training facility here.
Sell the farm? No, there, because we need.
Yes.
Move it.
Second. So motion by Taylor to receive, second by Raddick. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Moving on to 7, District Health Building, 21 is the page number.
Move it.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Passes 5-0. Moving on to item 8, Tri-View Facility, page 22 and 23. I'll move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, guys.
All right, moving on to reports on committee meetings.
Just a second. The EMA Commission did not approve the hazmat, 25,000. So instead of including that in the allocation for general stuff for EMA, we're sliding that over to emergency services, increase their budget by 25. It does not affect the tax rate.
Okay.
There's some concern why they're countywide tax, it's just the way it works. So it's just move from one budget to the other, stays, tax rate stays the same.
Can you give us a running total at the beginning of next week, please, and thank you, on what the gap is now that we've done everything that we have?
325,000 through 2 cuts and additional revenue.
With the
So
farm,
I do bring
with the
up that
farm?
sheet. Huh?
With the farm?
No, I didn't include the farm, because first we gotta sell the farm, second you gotta allocate it to debt service. So I can't really include that yet. I can tell you what it could be, but I hate to say a number, because then we're exposing what we expect out of it. That's why I kept trying to avoid saying a number, because you wanna throw out 1 million, 3 million, 4 million, then that's what they're gonna bid.
2.5 million.
We can throw out 3 million.
It's got 3 million.
Throw any number out.
There we go, 7 million.
You never know.
All right, reports on committee meetings, item 16.
We can all just bid it up ourselves and
Yeah.
hope that someone else bids after us. Otherwise,
So does anybody have any committee meetings?
No.
All right, moving on to 17, citizen concerns.
Yes, I'm sorry, Keith. I'm trying to get the landfill commission together because they haven't met in a while. So I didn't make a phone call, try to get everybody together.
Have the two retired already?
That's my understanding.
If they retired, they don't have
Neither-
anybody,
they have not-
anybody sign checks out there.
They've not returned calls I sent. One of them
retired at the end of last year.
The other one got defeated, or didn't run. He didn't run, Correctionville, I believe.
No, so the new mayor of Correctionville is Kathy Hoffman.
So they
it's not me.
need to meet to get somebody signed checks. And we can't write a check right now.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So who do I talk to and get some help running that meeting? Because it sounds like the chairperson resigned and the old clerk resigned, and so I don't have.
The
any-
clerk didn't officially resign, did she? She
I-
threatened to. I tried to tell her, stay on until you get a new board.
Based on the emails I read, she resigned, but I
Normally
left her
she
a message
calls
last
me.
night and she hasn't called me back.
I can try to call her in the morning,
Okay.
see if she'll answer. But otherwise, you might have to lead the troops and call a meeting.
That's scary. Rocky, your comments?
One plan on
went to the E91 Service Board budget hearing. It was approved. Just a shout out to Chairman Gary Merkel, who stepped down after serving for a couple dozen years as the chair of that board, and I think he's out of Cushing.
He was also chair of the landfill commission.
Yeah, quite a service record there. So.
All right, well, citizen concerns, board concerns.
We got a full agenda next week. We got quite a few. You're calling in, I believe. So if you want an idea of what we have up next week, we have okay, on the 25th.
Secondary
we got
roads.
Secondary roads. County Sewer, Hard Rock, and infrastructure funds. Basically, it's the same as we've done in the past. We just have a bunch of general funds that are not obligated yet. Those are funds we use down the road. We have debt service. That's just showing you where all our debt's at. Veterans Affairs, Juvenile Detention, Economic Development Department, Emergency Management, District Health, and WIC.
And I think we have the county assessor meeting after that. Isn't that next week?
We have,
That's at 6 p.m. Yep.
yeah,
So you might want to meet, or I don't know what your agenda is, or you have items like you had today or the last meeting where we run for an hour and a half. You want to consider starting at 3:30.
yeah, I think that's good. And then we also have our conference board tomorrow with the city. So I plan to be there. I don't know who else does, but. All right. Well, with that, I believe we're adjourned. Caitlin, how was that? Anything to write about?